Kom maar ja. This is the Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission, March 13th meeting. On the agenda today, we will have items of interest from commissioners, followed by the director's report. On the consent agenda, we have consideration of the minutes from February 27th. That will then be followed by the South Portland addressing hearing and recommendation. If you are here to testify, please pick up a form from Julie and fill it out and then give it back to her. That hearing will then be followed by the Social Equity Investment Strategy and Displacement Risk Analysis briefing.
I didn't realize.
Oh, any items of interest from commissioners? Ben?
I've attended the Urbanism Next conference last week. This is the first national conference that was actually held here in Portland on the subject of basically new technologies, mainly autonomous vehicles, e-commerce, and the sharing economy. And we had a lot of very engaging speakers and conversations. It was a 3-day long conference, and interesting that took place here in Portland. So we're still, I guess, at the leading edge of this thinking. But I would say one of the takeaways from it is that there's a lot of emerging technologies that kind of brought us to the kind of at a point in time where there'll be lots of change in the future, and lots of work to be done to really kind of steer that future in the right path. And right now it's very open. Another thing that I think caught my attention is that someone said, and it was kind of the leitmotif of the conference, was that technologies can be in service of people, not the way around. And right now, as I said, it's very much open. The technology is really up and available, and on the regulatory side, there's a lot to be done.
Thank you for that update. Anybody else have an item of interest? No? Director's report, Joe?
Okay. So there's a number of things today. First, the new youth commissioner position closes this Friday. We'll begin reviewing applications on March 16th and expect the new commissioner to be on board right after we get through the residential infill project, so likely early July. Secondly, Katie is stepping down from her role as the Planning and Sustainability Commission liaison to the PDX Community Advisory Committee. So this is the core group that's advisory to the Portland Airport. They have quarterly meetings, and it's continued to work and planning in the areas based on the Airport Futures Project. And they're interested in another PSC member to participate in this group if anyone is interested. So for now, we'll just put it out there as that announcement, and any interest, please express it to Julie, communicate with Julie, and then if we don't get a member, we'll follow up.
We'll start twisting arms.
We'll start twisting arms. But the last of the announcements is a little bit longer, but I wanted to give you a heads up or just an update on what's been happening with the Central City 2035 at City Council, because it's worked its way through. It's almost had its last hearing, and what happens at each of these meetings, something new gets introduced, which can only be introduced, and then you have the hearing. So we're always one behind, but. On March 7th, there was a long list of amendments that the City Council considered for Central City 2035, and they made these decisions that they're going to allow transfer floor area from open space zones. So to the extent that, for instance, unused floor area that the city owns on Waterfront Park, the city's in a position now to sell in the transfer market in the Central City. Secondly, they've increased the amount of bonus floor area that you can earn for commercial projects under the inclusionary housing program. So before it was a set fee, I think it's $24 per square foot of bonus floor area, and when Central City 2035 goes into effect, it'll be $24 per foot and a half. So it effectively lowers the cost per square foot of the commercial IH bonus. Third, they made various adjustments to heights in Old Town. So really mostly the buildings to the west and to the north of Old Town, they took back to the higher heights that they were. They maintained the PSC's recommendation to not protect the view from Salmon Springs, and for your all's recommendation about how to protect the view from Vista Bridge. They added River Place to the list of sites that have a mandatory master plan process imposed on it. And they added language to the I-5 Rose Quarter action item to direct bureaus to work cooperatively with the community to ensure implementation of the equity strategy. So that's sort of where we got through with the most of the amendments. What's left at our next meeting on March 22nd is that they'll consider whether to maintain or remove one particular view corridor of Mount Adams from Upper Southwest Hall Street. They're going to decide how much guidance to provide on how to measure top of bank under structures and wharves. This is mostly an issue that's arisen in North Reach, but affects the Central Reach. And they're going to consider whether or not to increase the height at reconsider the height at River Place, raising it from what PSC recommended and approved, 200 feet, to, on a few sites, a maximum height of 325. So they're going to vote on the full plan on May 24th, and currently the expected effective date of the Central City Plan would be July 9th.
So are they voting on the 24th or the 22nd?
This says the 24th.
Okay.
Yeah, May 24th. Oh, it's March 22nd is the next work
is
session.
the next work session.
Right, and then the vote, remember, has to be after the comp plan,
Got it.
which gets approved by the state, hopefully the morning of the 24th, I believe. So, okay.
Great. Very clear. Thank you, Joe. So on the consent agenda is consideration of the minutes from February 22nd. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? Next item on the agenda is the South Portland addressing. This is a hearing and recommendation. Andrew, Abby, and Don Ross, if you could come up. If you are here to testify, just as a reminder, Julie has testimony cards to be filled out. If you could fill that out and bring them to her. And we will be taking 2 minutes in duration for the testimony. Thank you. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Thank you, Andrew, Abby. I'm with the Portland Bureau of Transportation. I'm joined with Captain Mike Krebs from the Portland Police Bureau. Don Russ had planned to join us today, but you may have looked out your window yesterday and seen a giant column of black smoke coming from the Cully neighborhood. That was a 5-alarm fire, and Deputy Chief Russ was working hard to try to get those people displaced in the fire back into their homes. So he sends his regrets today and regrets that he couldn't join us today. With that, shall I just go ahead and move on into the presentation? So I was back here in December and gave you a more detailed presentation. I just kind of wanted to update you on where we've been and just want to touch a few of the highlights from December, just in case there's some folks joining us here for the first time. So you remember in December we talked about creating a new 6 addressing section for South Portland. You remember the rationale for why we currently have leading through addresses. There's a curvature in the river. The river goes as many as 24 blocks east. The decision was made in 1931 that we were going to start the addressing from what is now Nadeau Parkway and the Burnside Bridge, as opposed to starting it from the easternmost point of land west of the Willamette River. So what we've done since then is on February 15th, we sent out 5,027 letters to all of the property owners whose addresses are proposed to be changed. I've reached out to each and every neighborhood association, and I've also reached out to the to Riverdale as well, and unincorporated Multnomah County. We've had a very intensive outreach process on this. Just to update you, we have had just above a 1% response rate out of those 5,027 letters. We were about 60 responses at the end of February. The vast majority of those were either supportive or just simply calling for information. I think at last count we had about 8 or 9 people opposed out of 5,027 notifications that went out in February. So I'm extremely pleased with the results so far. Just to give you a quick update, you remember back in December I told you that our new 911 telephone system didn't work with leading zero addresses. I'm pleased to report that we've been able to put in a workaround. I'm not exactly sure what it is. It may be putting in a letter O as opposed to a number 0. I'm not sure. That's more technical detail than I know. I just know that they've been able to plug the hole with bubble gum or something to kind of make the system work. So I wanted to report out that that is currently working. But I also wanted to report out to you that we still are left with the process of having to do address validation. And I kind of want to put a little bit of a personal touch on that from a story that Don Russ and I were discussing. So in 2017, we had approximately 70,000 calls that came into 911. And behind each of those is somebody's personal story. And for many of those people who call, it's the worst telephone call they will make in their life. The conversation I had with Deputy Chief Russ was a particular call where the woman was in respiratory distress and she could not breathe. And her husband had to make the call for her, and the 911 dispatcher had to go through the normal protocol of why are you calling, is it police, fire, medical, what seems to be the issue. The husband who called in could barely describe the respiratory distress that was going on and trying to comfort her at the same time that she was literally passing on. And so really what I'm trying to emphasize here is validation is an information technology term, but it doesn't do justice to the personal trauma that people go through when they're calling 911 and they're concerned that the call is going to go to the wrong location or they're getting asked all these questions by the dispatcher of where they're physically located. So really fundamentally what we want to do here is to eliminate that step where we no longer have to do that validation process because we no longer have a leading zero address. With that, I wanted to just give Captain Krebs the floor briefly. He's going to talk a little bit about what it takes to train a police officer and what it's like to be in an emergency response situation in leading zero.
Good afternoon, folks. I'm Mike Krebs. I'm the captain of our traffic division. And about 3 or 4 months ago, Andrew had called me and wanted to know what I knew about the leading zero and what I thought about the addressing. And I told him that I was a police officer in Utah for 11 years before I moved to Portland. And when I was going through my training cycle, it was very confusing. Coming down here and you see, 360, then you see 0360 a couple blocks away. It became very confusing as a new trainee police officer. And so I said, yeah, I'm very interested in talking about that because it is confusing. And when we train our police officers, they rotate through the precinct. So you get hired, we send you to the police academy, and then you go to a series of coaches. And you're assigned a coach and maybe in Central Precinct. And you may be with that coach for a couple of months, and you may end up working Southwest Portland, or you may be working downtown. Not everyone's going to have an opportunity to work down in the leading zero area. It's a small area. There's not a lot of calls down there. And we would expect our coaches to at least take the officers down there and show them that. But it would be kind of a brief kind of introduction to it in most cases. So 5-10 years later, an officer is driving down there. They get an emergency call. They go down there. But it can be a little bit confusing. So I'll make myself clear, but it's really, really different. I was a cop in Utah. When I first got there, I thought, wow, that is weird. It's just, I was talking to Andrew, if I was doing a traffic stop down there today, I would have to really pay really, really close attention where I was, and particularly at night. So if I was to somehow confuse the addresses and I suddenly got involved in some kind of an altercation or some kind of a foot pursuit, if I am wrong by a zero, it might be kind of hard for someone to find me in a backyard wrestling with somebody. So, I know that I really feel bad that there might be some inconvenience for the folks that live there. But if there's an emergency, that time is of the essence, and if the officer has the zero wrong, there could be dire consequences. I don't have any particular, scary stories or anything like that, but it's definitely confusing down there. And just because we train our officer, one time or two times, and they get transferred over to North Precinct and never use it for 10 years, and suddenly they get, reassigned back to Central, it would be something that would be kind of a, in a very stressful situation. There's definitely margin for error where there shouldn't be. So I'd be happy to take any questions you have about that.
Thank you, Captain Krebs. So I'll move on to the next slide here. I shared with you in December some examples of where even PBOT had gotten the street signs wrong. I also just wanted to show you, these are all real-life examples on the bottom half, middle of the screen that I pulled up in the past week. So I had a meeting with the South Portland Business Association earlier this week. We were going to meet in a coffee shop. I couldn't remember the name of the coffee shop where we were meeting. I'd been there once before, so I Googled coffee shop, South Waterfront, and the first thing that popped up was this coffee shop allegedly at 614 Southwest Dakota, but I knew that it was really 0614 Southwest Dakota. I also had a meeting with Lewis and Clark College last month, and just for the fun of it, I was curious how far it was from Lewis and Clark to Riverdale, where we're going to be holding one of the open houses. So I punched in 0615 Southwest Palatine Hill Road to Riverdale Grade School, and it immediately chopped the 0 off of the address for Lewis and Clark. I did an experiment. I'll just show you the lower left 2 there. So I actually went to my car and parked in front of 16 Southwest Whitaker Street. There's a 016 Southwest Whitaker Street. So I sat in my car, and I'm not going to give you personal identifiable information of what kind of a car I drive because I'm sitting next to a police officer here, but I sat in front of 16 Southwest Whitaker Street and punched in 016, and my GPS came back and said, you're already at 16 Southwest Whitaker Street. It just simply did not recognize the leading 0. And then I tried the same thing in MapQuest, and it did the same thing. So most systems work, you randomly select addresses, you punch something into Google, most of the time it'll work. I'm just saying there's enough of these anomalies where they don't work. And just to be clear, any homeowner or business who's currently on a North-South Street has no trouble Googling or identifying the North-South address. So I just want to make it really clear. We are imposing a degree of inconvenience on property owners on North-South streets, and they will see obviously much less benefit because they don't currently have a leading 0 problem. But in our judgment, it didn't make sense to have this overlay, like you have 2 area codes in one area, which is you have one area code if you're on a North-South street and you're southwest, and you have another area code if you're on an east-west street and you're south. We just thought it made sense to give everybody one area code or one directional to keep it simple. So moving right along, if we were setting up the city today, how would we set up a boundary that would be really easy to describe? Would you set it up like the Idaho-Montana border, where it snakes over the Rocky Mountains and it hardly ever goes in a straight line, and you don't know when you go for a hike when you're in Idaho or when you're in Montana? Or would you set it up like the Idaho-Wyoming border, where it's a nice straight line and it's fairly easy to figure out when you've crossed the border? Current addressing standards for cities when they set up their directionals is to set them up based on a body of water, a significant street, or something really significant. Instead, I drove out yesterday to Collins View, where I was a resident for many years and had a leading 0 address, and curiosity piqued the better of me. And so I went and I wanted to see where this leading 0 dividing line was that maybe Captain Krebs might have a call out to. So I went to Ahavai, I'm probably mispronouncing this, Ahavai Shalom Cemetery in Collins View. And I pulled up, and there was a gentleman who was teaching somebody how to dig graves. And I really startled him when I came up because he wasn't expecting anybody to arrive. But then once I got in, I walked through the cemetery because I wanted to see that east property line, which is currently the leading 0 addressing boundary. And you're looking at it. It has a pink circle around it. That is the leading 0 dividing line in Collins View between leading 0 and non-leading 0. Not exactly a landmark. So what we want to do is, and this is a change that we made since December. We made it at the end of February. We did this based on neighborhood feedback, which is, if you look at the map on the left, that's where the current dividing line is between leading zero and non-leading zero. You can see it kind of snakes all over the place. It kind of looks like a gerrymandered congressional district. You can see that it goes along the east property line of the cemetery there. We said, wouldn't it be much more simple if the dividing line between the future South and Southwest Portland went down an actual street instead of an east cemetery line or snaking through people's backyards. So we moved the line so that it goes right down Viewpoint Terrace. So if you look there on the right, there's a street sign of Viewpoint Terrace and Brigger Street. So it'll be much simpler to figure out when you're crossing the line. It's not going to be quite as simple as this, but here's a picture of a traffic signal that I built about 2 years ago under an LID at the intersection of Fremont and Williams. You can see how simple it is because on the left side of the intersection is North Portland, and on the right side of the intersection is Northeast Portland. Viewpoint Terrace doesn't quite have the gravitas of Williams Avenue, but you get my point. It's just easier to have a dividing line at an intersection as opposed to in the middle of a block. Just to quickly recap, these are examples of what the address changes will be. In 99.9% of all cases, it's just going to be stripping the W off of everybody's or removing the zero. We do have a few isolated examples of where we'll need to change street names. For example, we have an unplatted right-of-way at the intersection of Front Avenue and Taylor's Ferry Road, which never got changed. What we want to do is to change that to Viewpoint Terrace and Taylor's Ferry Road. There's currently no properties accessing Taylor's Ferry. We just want to set it up so that at some point in the future, if those properties develop, that there's a consistent dividing line of Viewpoint Terrace. As you remember, NATO Parkway is designating, it starts the designation between south and southwest, but as we move further south, and again, this is why we made that boundary change in Collins View, we just wanted to have Viewpoint Terrace and NATO Parkway to be the consistent dividing line all the way from the Burnside Bridge to the Clackamas County line. And then finally, before we open it up to testimony, I just wanted to recap the key milestones. So we are back here in December giving you the detailed briefing. We started off our outreach with the South Portland Neighborhood Association beginning in January. We did a front page article on the Southwest Neighborhood News that went out in February mailed to between 8,000 and 9,000 people. In February, we also mailed out the notices. We started the open houses last week. We only had 12 people show up at our first open house, and I actually took that as a very good sign because what that told me is most people were able to open up their letters and get the information they needed from the letters and didn't have to take time out of their busy schedules to go to the open houses. So we will continue those open houses through the beginning of April, and then we have a council hearing at the end of May. This is really important to understand. So the change does not actually begin until May of 2020. So that gives people time to use up their stationery and make all the changes. And then in May 2027, the street signs are removed. On a final note, several of the commissioners have asked me, what can we do to make this a little bit easier for people? So I passed out some testimony to Julie this morning. I had a meeting this morning with the Multnomah Athletic Club. Not that everybody in the city of Portland is a Multnomah Athletic Club member, but I just simply knew their membership director. So I sat down with them this morning and I said, what if we could make it so that instead of every Multnomah Athletic Club member who lives in South Portland comes to you one by one to change their address? I said, what if we could just simply give you a list of addresses that are going to change, and you could just, from a database point of view, in May of 2020, update it? He said, no problem, we'll do that. And we'll publish something in our monthly magazine that tells our members that you don't need to call us to change your address to South Portland. We've already got it dialed in with PBOT, and we'll make those changes automatically for you. So that's something that I want to do with utility providers and, you know, the other folks where everybody does business with them to the extent that we can do that, because I want this to be the easiest street name change that's been ever done in the history of the city of Portland by kind of pre-filling in some of the forms, so to speak, for people to change their addresses. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have in advance of the testimony. I appreciate your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Andrew, and Captain Krebs. So looks like we have questions from Chris. And any other questions? And then Andre.
So two questions. The first is in terms of working with local entities to prepare for this. If you could elaborate any conversations you had with the post office, I'd be interested in that. And then could you tell us what happens during the 5-year transition period in terms of when a property owner can start doing things, when they have to finish doing things, and sort of what happens during that 5 years?
Sure. Let's take the second question first. So nothing changes till May of 2020. And so what we have to do is we have to do a fair amount of internal testing within the city. I don't expect that to be difficult, right? Because we're not going from South Portland to Leading Zero, Southwest Portland. We're going the opposite direction. But we have to set up the schema to work. We already have a preliminary crosswalk on the www.sixsextant.com website. So what we're basically going to do over the next 2 years is all the city bureaus that have addresses like the Water Bureau billing system, the permit system, all those things. We'll be doing those tests, and then we'll be prepared to globally update those records. So on around May of 2020, then we'll start flipping the switch and change everybody in 2020. And then we will work with maintenance operations to get the new street signs up. So we'll have to time the actual date of the switch. So for example, they're not going to go out in one day and change each and every street sign. And so we'll be working through all that. But nobody changes until May of 2020. I mentioned that we'd sent out one mass mailing in February, so there will be another mailing this summer after council approves the ordinance. I'm already working with the Bureau of Development Services for the relatively rare number of people that actually have to change their address other than removing the Leading Zero. It's probably about 26 people due to a sequencing issue in Collins View. We will notify those people now in the summer of 2018 what their new address will be. And then they won't get another piece of mail until early 2020 saying, hey, you can start using your address. And then 5 years later, we'll send them another notice and say, the old address is definitely retired now, don't use it. To your point about the post office commissioner, I will be meeting with the Postal Service. I do recall from my meeting with the city of Hillsborough that's gone through a much more major change where they're changing every street name, every number, every directional, or almost every one. Really what they said is they didn't have too much difficulty working with the post office. The big difficulty they had was getting new zip codes assigned. It's not that hard for a city to adopt an ordinance and change a street name and then change an address. What's really, really hard is changing a zip code, and you almost have to get Donald Trump on your side in order to get a new zip code. So, but we're not changing any zip codes.
Okay. So going back to the 5-year transition period question, I was thinking more from the point of view of the property owners or businesses. So if I'm a business and I've got 5,000 brochures I printed up with my old address or a box of business cards that's going to last me for the next decade, can I keep using those? When do I want to switch? How do I make it less expensive to switch as I work through materials I may have?
Sure. So that's part of the reason why we want to have the 2-year advance window, so that somebody doesn't place an enormous order for a lifetime supply of business cards. So, based on what I heard from the city of Hillsborough, and keep in mind, they moved on a much more aggressive time frame than they were shocked that we were actually going to take a 5-year time period to have old and new. They kind of ripped the bandage off in a much shorter time period. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was more along the lines of months and not years. So the idea is we give everybody, we've already given everybody prospective notice that now is probably not the time to put in a giant order for Leading Zero business cards. So everybody knows that already. And then people will have a 5-year time window in which to sort of exhaust that supply. I am willing to personally provide a case of liquid white paper from Costco to anybody that wants to white out the old zero on their business card. That's an easy ask, and I'm happy to do that. All that aside, I know there's going to be a cost associated with it, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We're not going to replace the sign that may be out in front of your business. We're not going to order the business cards. The city's not going to do that for you. There will be an inconvenience. There will be an expense. I think what I'm really struck by, Commissioner, is when I start looking at how much it costs to put these Band-Aids on IT systems. Council in the past 3 or 4 months has approved 2 $300,000 plus contracts to do programming changes on mission critical systems. Now, these had nothing to do with Leading Zero, but I'm just saying when you're already doing business with an IT vendor and you need a specialized programming fix, you're talking well into the 6 figures. And I just want to return to the business case for this, which is we just think it makes more sense to spend $300,000, change the street signs so you can read something in the dark. When Captain Krebs is going to, Collins View for the first time in 8 years and he's lost, that he can actually read the street sign as he's going to an emergency call. We just think that that makes more sense. And for that person who may be in respiratory distress as she's calling 911, she doesn't have to get interviewed by the 911 dispatcher about where she's at. We just don't think that that provides good customer service.
Okay, so just to be really clear, so if I have 1,000 return address envelopes that say Leading Zero, Southwest Portland, the post office is going to deliver that to me, an envelope that either says Southwest Portland Leading Zero or South Portland without the Leading Zero. They're both going to get delivered to my mailbox for that 5-year period, right?
I'm going to squirm out of this, Commissioner, and say that I can't tell you what the post office is doing. But what I can tell you is that we have on the books on City Code a 5-year transition period. So to the extent that every other street renaming we've done, like Union Avenue, 39th Avenue, Portland Boulevard, and Front Avenue, I've not heard stories about people's mails being returned. And that was changing the underlying street name. I would be very surprised if people's Leading Zero mail got returned to sender. Stranger things have happened in the world of the federal bureaucracy, but I would not predict that that would happen.
Thank you very much.
The post office one was a critical one that I thought we'd have an answer to when you came back. So the name change on Radcliffe Street,
Yes.
is that's because the adding the E?
Yeah.
Is there a reason that it was named Radcliffe and now you're adding the E to amend it to somebody else's name, or is there some history there?
Well, what we're trying to do, Commissioner, is balance out the Leading Zero numbers with the missing consonants at the end of the. No, that was a poor attempt at humor. No, what we really have here, Commissioner, is we have a Scrivener's error. You go down Radcliffe Street, and the tax map, I forget which is which, but you have the tax map that doesn't have the E. The Multnomah County Assessment and Taxation Database does have the E. The street sign does or does not have an E. It's basically a random shuffle about whether it has the E or doesn't have the E. What I do know is that in Crestwood, you have one block with the E, and then 3 blocks away, you have it without the E. And I don't know, maybe I have too much attention to detail, but as I drive through Crestwood, it kind of annoys me when I'm driving down one north-south street that is spelled one way, and then I'm 3 blocks over the other way, and it's spelled differently. Same thing with Martin Court in Woodstock. I haven't gotten anything but positive feedback on standardizing the spelling. So really, when it comes to Radcliffe and Martin's, it's just simply an issue in standardizing the spelling.
Okay. And then the 911 call and you say verification of the address. Does 911 not verify the address when someone calls in? So this is a special case that they verify the address. So if someone calls in with an emergency, does 911 not verify addresses? If someone says, I'm at 123 X whatever street, they don't verify that. And in this case, the Leading Zero, they take an extra step to verify?
Yeah, that would actually be a good question for Captain Krebs to answer, and if he can. Let me just say really quickly from a database point of view, every street in the city and every center line has a Leading Zero flag on it. That's only for Portland, okay? So if you are at 444 Southwest Bancroft Street, but you could be at 044 Southwest Bancroft Street, the street center line, both sections of Bancroft, have a Leading Zero flag, and I want to make it really clear. The street center line that is west of the Leading Zero boundary also has that flag on it, right? Because we want to make sure that if somebody's calling from east of the line, but they think they're west of the line and they drop to 0, that's what I'm saying, is that if you're in Homestead or you're in one of those neighborhoods that is predominantly west of the Leading Zero line, you will get interviewed with the 911 dispatcher about whether you're really at 444 or 0444. That is not the case with the street center line, for example, in Northeast Portland. So, for example, if you have an emergency like yesterday at the 7500 block of Northeast Killingworth, there's a column of black smoke going up. There is not a Leading Zero address flag on Northeast Killingworth Street because there's no Leading Zero. So they go through the normal protocol, I believe, of verifying an address. What I'm saying is there's not an additional protocol to make sure that you're not really a Leading Zero address. Do you want to speak to that, Captain?
I don't have an answer for you. I'd have to get hold of our BOEC and find out exactly how they do that. As a police officer, that they call me and I take my call and respond. But if you want, I can dig into that if you like and get you an answer.
Yeah, and actually, Commissioner, I can just take you back to this slide here. So if you look at that slide number 3 there, that is what the BOAC operator sees. So you could really be at 16 Southwest Whitaker Street, and this little flag's going to pop up and say, are you sure you're at 16 or are you really at 016? That little dialog box does not pop up in that fashion if you're calling from Northeast Portland, Southeast Portland, that type of thing.
They don't have to clarify.
So they don't have to clarify where you are. That's what I'm trying to decide is if there's an extra step. And so I'm
going to go out on a limb here, Commissioner, and I'm not BOAC, I'm not Don Russ, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that anytime you call from anywhere in the city, yes, there's going to be some degree of an address validation step. What I'm really trying to say is if you're potentially in a leading zero, you really have 2 addressing validation steps.
Are there any other questions? I have a question that I believe you covered in our briefing, but I'd love for you to just clarify it again, is have you worked with the counties? So this would kind of be, I believe, in Multnomah County. Does it affect Clackamas County at all, and or City of Lake Oswego?
Yes, we have worked very closely with Multnomah County. Don Russ and I briefed Multnomah County Commissioner Sharon Meyer on this effort. Her signature went out on the letter that went out to all 5,027 people. And even though the city has, under an existing IGA, the full power to assign whatever street name we want to folks in Riverdale, we wanted to have Multnomah County on board, most importantly have them aware of the rationale for doing this, and they've been quite supportive of that effort. And so we've worked very seamlessly with them on that. I'm sorry, what was your second question?
Well, just are there, so for instance, I know that this is right at the line of Multnomah and Clackamas County.
Yes.
So are there other counties or jurisdictions that are aware that this is happening, and how would it or may not affect them?
Yes, and I'm glad you asked that question. In the interest of transparency, I would tell you, Commissioner, that they have quite the little mess south of the Clackamas County line. That is outside our jurisdiction. We have been reaching out to Clackamas County through informal channels, and we'll continue doing so. We'll see where that lands, but I sort of suspect that, once we clean up our little mess north of the line, there may be some momentum for them to do it south of the line. I'm certainly happy to brief them on what may be transpiring. We're just still trying to make those contacts with Clackamas County.
So maybe help me understand in an emergency situation, perhaps Captain Krebs, you could address this, but if a phone call ends up in Clackamas County and yet the incident's in Multnomah County, I mean, if you're somebody who's on the county line there, I'm trying to anticipate what issues there may be about somebody who's just on the other side of the county line, not understanding what we're doing north of the county line.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. What they do is each of those, our dispatch centers work closely with other dispatch centers. So Clackamas County and Lake Oswego will have their own dispatch centers. We have our own. And if there's any kind of confusion, it's not unusual sometimes if a Portland police officer gets dispatched to a county call, that wouldn't be that unusual. We would just handle it like we would if it belonged to us. And if we learn later on that this is actually a Clackamas County call, then we would get hold of Clackamas County somewhat. I think that I'm trying to say is that I think there's enough safeguards that if you're just happen to be one street over, a police officer will come, whether it's Clackamas County, Lake Oswego, or Portland. If it's an emergency, it probably doesn't matter that much. Because once the police officers get there, we can sort that out to find out whose call it really is. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. I guess what I'm trying to understand is, are they going to have confusion with the addressing system because it's changed? Are they aware of it and comfortable with the fact that Portland's changing its addresses right there at a county line?
Right. I've actually contacted folks from the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office and the folks from the Lake Oswego Police Department. And at this point, they were not that interested in changing their addressing system. They say it's working fine for them. And just as I was thinking...
So I guess, I'll try asking one more way. I live in Multnomah County.
Okay.
Yet for some reason, my call goes to, I don't know any better because I think I live in Lake Oswego.
Okay.
I call Lake Oswego. Are they going to be confused by the fact that all of a sudden my address has changed? Or is there communication with Lake Oswego to have them understand how South Portland addresses have changed? Because
Yes.
they're the closest
Right.
responder. Let's put it that way.
Yes,
Right?
Commissioner. And last August, Don Russ and I briefed Lake Oswego Fire. They were there at the table when we were sitting around saying, should we be doing this? And what the answer came back was there's a lot of mutual aid stuff that goes on, both police and fire, and they have to train all of their people and they have to do all of their stuff. So they don't have leading zero addresses. They have other issues with addressing, but they don't have leading zero addresses. In their judgment, they think that their system is working fine. What they will no longer have to do is to train their own emergency responders on the leading zero issue in Portland, and so it's a benefit for them. I briefed Lewis and Clark College a week or two ago, and it was pretty interesting talking to one of the senior officials here that lived in Riverdale. They said, I had a burglar alarm call once, and 7 hours later, the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office showed up. I don't know that 7 hours would be considered an acceptable response time, so I think the reality is you're going to have different jurisdictions responding based on whoever is closest. So
Well, one thing that happens is that our dispatch centers are very tightly connected to each other. It'd be probably good if you guys have a lot of questions about the dispatching system. It might be good to have someone from BOEC come here and answer the questions firsthand. I was thinking before I leave here today, I can actually call up there and get some of these questions answered for you, particularly about, how when a leading zero comes in, how much more time does it take for them to figure out are you a zero or are you just a straight up 921 kind of thing. So I can ask some of these questions and I can come back in here if you like, or I can even have a BOAC person come back here at a different time to ask these kind of questions.
Well, we'll go into deliberations and determine if that's a step that we feel is necessary or not. But thank you for offering.
But I can make that happen, folks. I just, on the receiving end of those calls, dispatch they're up there taking care of us. Basically, they're getting it all sorted out and they're trying to send us to the right place. How they get there, I don't know all the processes they go through to figure that all out there, but they are very good about figuring these kind of things out and sending us to places.
And Commissioner, I would also add, you have a Lake Oswego zip code, but you're in Multnomah County. And so there were a handful of letters that I mailed out among the 5,027 that said, hi, you're in Multnomah County, your address is changing. But I had the Lake Oswego 97034 zip code on it. That's just kind of a geographical boundary quirk, but Multnomah County is still responsible for you.
Got it. Andreas, looks like you have a question.
Yeah, just quickly, in that vein, we know that there are addresses where the Postal Service says Portland, but they're not within the municipality of Portland. Is that something the city can influence in any way?
In theory, yes, but when I talked to Hillsborough, they said it was like pulling teeth. And they almost needed a United Nations declaration to change a zip code because it's really hard to get the federal bureaucracy to change zip codes. But, that seems to make a lot of sense to me. That I think part of the issue is, Commissioner, your mail physically comes out of the Lake Oswego post office. And so I think that's kind of how they base it. But that's certainly a conversation I'd be willing to have. I just wouldn't want to overpromise and underdeliver.
So for clarity, the only way to do that would be to change zip codes?
I think so. That's the way Hillsborough explained it to me, yes.
For what it's worth, I'm not looking for you to do that, but nor is I looking to necessarily announce where I live. But that all being said, I appreciate that clarity. Okay, if there are no further questions, I think we'll go ahead and start taking some testimony. If you are here to testify, please make sure you filled out a card. Julie has them right up here. We are limiting testimony to 2 minutes. At this time, I will call, how about 2 at a time? First is Ormond Ormsby, and then Mary Ellen Reed.
For the record, my name is Ormond Ormsby.
Thank you. It looks like that microphone is not on.
Hello.
Okay, you might have
switch.
Well, or you may just have to pull it closer to you. It likes to be very close.
There we go. Again, for the record, my name is Ormond Ormsby,
Thank
and I think I have been the subject of a lot of conversation from you just recently, going around the questionnaires on the table. I am a recipient of one of the letters from Andrew. Okay, from Andrew, and I am here today just to simply request that this body defer a go no go decision on the matter until after public hearings. The purpose of that is that, in a sense, we're having the public hearings after a go no go decision is going to be would be rendered, and as such, the public testimony that may go along with this issue would be rather muted by the fact that the body, PBOT, has already received permission to go ahead and proceed. To give you a bit of kind of a summary background of where my property is I am on that jagged edge between Multnomah County and Clackamas County. The address to which this letter was addressed was 13175 Southwest Iron Mountain Boulevard, Portland, Oregon 97219-8521 for the extended zip. Under the current proposal, my address would change to 13175 WI/space Iron Mountain Boulevard. Now, what drew my attention to this immediately was the inclusion of a / into the address. I have had the experience in business of sending letters and communications, etc., throughout the world, i.e. Europe, South America, Canada, Asia, and never have I seen the use of a / in an address. And that would cause one to run into potentially some problems in the sense of, for example, getting your driver's license as a form of identification is to have the inclusion of a / which is not inclusive of any address in existence to the best of my knowledge. I queried 2 telemarketers that contacted me yesterday on this matter, and they make calls throughout the country, and they have never seen a / included in the address.
Thank you. If you could wrap up, that'd be great.
Okay, well, I'm just simply saying that I would request that this body defer a decision until after public hearings have been made.
And so I appreciate that. So I will provide a little bit of clarity here. So we are just one step in a process of this happening. Right. This is a hearing. So you actually are participating within the public hearing currently right now, which is fabulous. So thank you for doing so. Appreciate you bringing this to our attention.
By the way, Kelly is the person of contact for the emergency response in Clackamas County. Because when I have an issue, which having lived in the neighborhood for 60 some odd years, we have had at various times police, fire, emergency vehicles, first responders in the neighborhood. And the city of Lake Oswego, whom I queried yesterday, has no problem with a 0 on the front. I contacted a representative, I was referred over to Clackamas County as well yesterday, who then reached out to their counterpart in the Emergency Services Communications Division, and they have no problem. And in fact, they have not been.
I appreciate that feedback.
They have not been contacted yet.
Granted, thank you for the name. We'll encourage Andrew to reach out to Kelly, and if maybe we'll get the last name if you happen to have it a little bit later.
I can get it.
Great. And then I guess just so your understanding of the process. So our goal here is to have the hearing today, deliberate, and make a recommendation. That's our goal. Doesn't mean it'll all pan out that way. And then it would, it looks like from the schedule, there's still some open houses, so they're still gathering comments.
3 or 4.
And then it goes to City Council. So this is by no means a final decision. It is one step along the way in a process. So there'll be another opportunity to provide testimony before any decisions are made by PBOT.
Salute.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Orman.
Thank you.
Are there other questions of Orman before? No. Thank you very much. Mary Ellen?
Yes, I'm Mary Ellen Reed. I'm representing the Collinsview Neighborhood Association. Collinsview Neighborhood Association voted to voice its support of the addressing project process as it is proceeding in Collinsview. There were 17 votes in favor with 1 dissent. The issues of the dissenting vote included keeping the record open for written comment until after the open houses, which you just addressed. The majority neighborhood board opinion included there is a universal acknowledgement of the needs of first responders and our needs, whose emergencies they're responding to remove any address ambiguities. It takes no imagination at all to see how critical this is. We appreciate the ongoing, continual communication updates of the project, starting with the February 15th letter, which clearly told people what the process is as it relates to Collinsview. We appreciate Project Manager Andrew Abbey's proactive, ongoing conversations and working with us to address homeowners' concerns and craft the language and details of the ordinance. Specifically, our understanding is that the ordinance will state there will be no changes in existing land use regulations. There will be no changes in zoning regulations, and there will be no changes in tax lots code. Thank you for giving me, as representative of the Neighborhood Association, the opportunity to be heard and to participate in this process.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Commissioner, I just wanted to quickly note that that / address on the previous testimony was for a vacant lot. And that is not a real address, and at such time that that lot is developed, it will be assigned a new address. But I just want to make it clear for the record that is not an actual address. Thank you.
I need a Robert's rule. Do I technically need him read in as a testifier, Chris?
Well, I assume we'll have him back up to answer questions at the end, and he could put it in the record then.
Okay, just like I said, getting help. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary Ellen. Next is Charles Ormsby, followed by Bob Nadeau.
Good afternoon, Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability Commission.
Could you pull the microphone just a little bit closer? Okay. It's very hard for us to hear.
Good afternoon, Catherine Schultz and members of the Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability Commission. My name is Charles Ormsby. I go by the nickname Skip. I'm representing what is referred to as the Birds Hill CPONA. We are a joint Clackamas County Community Planning Organization, Lake Oswego Neighborhood Association. We are in the triangular area, roughly bounded on the north or baseline of Multnomah County, Terwilliger Boulevard on the west, and the Willamette River on the east. It is the mother's lode of boundary conditions. Right now, I'd like to keep the record open on this so I can submit written testimony and and frankly, I think I would hope you would defer your decision today for at least a period until after the open houses are held, information gathered, and people begin to see this. About 4 years ago, I asked the city of Portland to notify me on things that affect our neighborhood. The communication has, in one word, been abysmal. We were severely affected by the Terwilliger Boulevard sewer project. We are currently being affected by the Tryon Creek wastewater treatment plant. Communication is not good. The word abysmal comes to practice again. Most recent meeting on February 22nd of the Tryon Creek wastewater treatment plant CAC, I've not heard anything from that. I'm concerned that's a $130 million project. With respect to addressing of this, I realize how complex this is. I am a caregiver for my mother. She's usually at my right-hand side. She's age 103 and 1/2. And one thing that you've not considered in this process, let me just briefly start again. You need to vet all documents from repositories, databases, and everything else, make sure they jive. You need to visualize everything out of that. Maps, diagrams, database designs, things. I have experience in international addressing. Then you need to go into a process of validation. Then you need to field verify. Critical entities for field verification in this area would be, I would suggest you contact TriMet Dispatch, I have experience dealing with them because I do move my mother around by TriMet Lyft, and I have to then direct people that are driving cabs under foggy conditions in our area. So I'm intimately aware of the communication problems that need to take place between various entities. Addressing is a concern. You're going to have to communicate with the post office. That's going to drive that. Immediate concern that's not been considered in current testimony by anybody is how this process works with identity documents, namely your driver's license and passports. I'm extremely concerned with the latter because
Thank
I have
you.
people.
If you could wrap it up, that'd be helpful.
Okay. Again, I want the record kept open, and I want to make sure that we are in the loop on this process. Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. Any questions? No. Thank you very much, Mr. Ormsby.
Chair
Mr.
Schultz,
Nato.
members of the commission, my name is Bob Nato. Andrew Abbey asked me to come and testify. I'm not sure if I'm testifying on behalf of Nato Parkway or street name changes, which I have a little familiarity with, going back to one that nobody really remembers because it didn't happen. But years ago, my dad tried to change the name Burnside Street to Tom McCall Street in the 80s. And the firestorm that lit in the letters to the editor of the Oregonian was just amazing. And afterwards, he always claimed credit for Tom McCall Waterfront Park, the name, because that was the city council's way to solve the problem of his continually testifying about wanting to change Burnside. So I did realize I do have a personal stake in this because my mother lives at the Mirabella, which is on Bond Street with a leading 0 address. And my mother is going to be 100 in the year 2025. So if you pass this, you will have solved my perennial problem of my mother's birthday present. It'll be stationary with the new address. And with that, I thank you very much.
Appreciate your testimony. Next is G. Leonard Mission Jr. and Michael Harrison. Those are the last two testifiers. If there's anybody else here who would like to provide testimony, if you could get a testimony card from Julie sitting here and fill that out, it'd be graciously appreciated. Please.
Yes, my name is Len Michon. I'm the president of the South Portland Neighborhood Association, and I'd like to thank all the commissioners for an opportunity to speak with you today. Our board took a very good presentation, or listened to a very good presentation in early January with regard to the process. And while we did not take a vote at that particular time, we did indicate universally that we were in favor of moving forward on this. I subsequently took a poll of our board members, and they were all in agreement to move this project forward. I think one of the big issues, which you've heard today, is really the safety factor. And emergency response is extremely important. I actually have had not in this location, but I had a personal situation where my wife was dying from Novocaine. And I was, quite frankly, very emotionally upset. Luckily, she survived. So I'm just want to, again, make a point that emergency preparedness with regard to quick response is very important. Secondly, I understand that there is a cost of every individual and business in making changes. There are a couple of people in our community who are concerned about the cost, but I still say that it is certainly something that we need to go forward with. And it's our understanding that the databases that have been created will be shared with different bureaus within the city, so that should make things easier. I attended the first open house, and quite frankly, I was surprised that there was a very limited number of attendees. but all of the questions that the attendees had were addressed. So I think that says quite a bit about the preparation for this. One final thing is, on a personal standpoint, since I live in the Zero leading address, I like it. It's quite unique, but I also understand that it's not easy. I've had a number of visitors from outside of the state try and find us, and most of the time, I live on the waterfront, most of the time they end up on Markham Hill, just because the GPS systems are not capable. So those are the main points. I appreciate your time, and thank you.
Thank you very much. If you could just so know, it looks like Commissioner Smith has a question.
Mr. Michon, could you clarify again the name of the business association you represent?
My name is Len Michon. I'm president of the South Portland Neighborhood Association.
The Neighborhood Association, not the business.
Not the Business
Okay.
Association.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any other questions of Len? Thank you, Mr. Michon.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Michael Harrison. I'm here today on behalf of OHSU. I think Andrew mentioned that there's some property owners who have their addresses on north-south streets, Moody, Bond, McAdam, and so they don't really necessarily directly benefit from the Leading Zero issue because they don't have them. I think OHSU is perhaps a poster child for such a business. In this case, a hospital and medical system. We've taken enormous pains to make sure that all of our addresses in South Waterfront happen on north-south streets, in part because we wanted to avoid the Leading Zero issue. I certainly understand that businesses throughout the area will be impacted and individuals will be impacted. We have 16,000 people with business cards. We have stationery for massive number of clinics, thousands of web pages. So it'll be a very disruptive experience for us. But despite not really directly benefiting and having an enormous amount of work to do in order to make this work, we're very supportive of this change, creating a sixth quadrant. Simply because we have a very active emergency department, and our providers know that if someone's having a heart attack or someone's having a stroke or someone's having a significant bleed, if it takes 3 extra minutes or 2 extra minutes for someone to arrive at our door, that is a meaningful, tangible difference. We can only provide the services that we can provide, and the stability of the patient when they arrive is very important to their outcome. So we're very much in favor of this, and just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Any questions? Nope. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Andrew, would you like to come back up and we'll see if there's any follow-up questions for you? So I'm going to call out, I should have done this real quick. It doesn't look like there's anybody else here to testify. If so, raise your hand real quick. Does not appear to be. So with that, we will close the hearing and go into deliberation.
Well,
So
I contacted our BOEC, our Emergency Communications Center, if you want me to respond to that.
go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, what
Thank you
happened
very
is-
much for thank you very much for doing that. I really appreciate it.
So what happened, I asked the question about the border, Lake Oswego and Clackamas County and Washington County, and they said that they have flags set up for all homes and businesses that adjoin the western or southern border. And what happens is someone calls up, a flag pops up, and then a map pops up, and they can narrow down where your home is at or your business is at. And if for whatever reason the 911 call came to BOEC, our dispatch center, and let's say that they say, oh, guess what, I think you're in Lake Oswego. What they would do, they actually dial Lake Oswego Police Department, our dispatch does, and then they connect the two, and they do not get off the phone until the caller has connected with Lake Oswego Police Department. So it'd be something like, hey, this is Portland Police. We have a caller online. Go ahead and talk. Yep, I'm Joe Smith, and I want to report, a burglary in progress. So they connect the two, basically. That's how they do the borders.
Great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, and I also talked to him, asked a question about if they were to get a call of 0126 Bancroft, And he said, what happens in those kinds of addresses? Both addresses pop up, 0126 and then 126. And then they would ask the question, can you confirm which one are you? So they get we have to do a little practice on the phone. He goes, give me a practice address. So he's able to see, yep, they both popped up, 0126 and then 126. So then they just confirm it like that. So that's it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Commissioner Smith?
Andrew, could you put the timeline slide back up for a minute?
I'm sorry, the which?
The timeline slide?
Yes.
So talk to me about the choice to have us make this decision before the open houses were completed.
Yes, thank you for asking that question. So I should say that when I was looking to schedule this hearing, my preference would have been to have the hearing in April, but PSC Commission has a pretty chock full agenda and April was not available. We already had the council date of May set aside. I will say one of two things. One is I'm totally fine with keeping the record open. If you want to, write your recommendation to council following the conclusion of the open house, please feel free to do that. That's your decision to make, not mine. I have absolutely no objection to it. I will just tell you that first open house last week was rather anticlimactic with 12 people showing up. But then again, the other open houses are in different areas. And I'm more than happy to tell people that the PSC record is still open if you want to continue taking that testimony and wait to write your recommendation. I think the main thing is just council will just need it in advance of their May 31st hearing.
So I'll be interested in my colleagues' thoughts about that. I think it's a little unusual to have a public process going on and not wait for the conclusion before we make a recommendation. I think the other issue would be the one that Andre and I both sort of touched on, which is, do we know exactly what the post office will do during that 5-year transition period? And I'd love to hear the answer to that before I have to cast a vote, but I may or may not get that opportunity, so it might give a little time to research that.
Jeff had his hand up, then Andre, and then Eli.
Andrew, do you know, will the city council open the record?
Yeah, the record is open now.
Right, but I mean, is there any reason to think the city council would or would not have a closed record? So
no, when we sent out the notices on February 15th, we had the email. I mean, I think this is really important to understand that the record doesn't open and close with the open houses. So all the notifications went out February 15th with the PSC email and with the city council email. So as far as I'm concerned, the record for both the PSC and the council is opened up in mid-February.
Right, and it would stay open at the city council level. They don't hold it closed.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Can I ask a quick question, and I'd ask you to be brief if you even have an answer, because this hasn't been touched on. We've heard a lot about the post office. I'm just curious with GPS, how would this work? Do you have any idea how this would work, or is there anything the city does and how it makes this transition? So when people start plugging in addresses,
sure,
what's going to happen? You're in a transition. Do you have any idea how that might work?
I do. So a couple of things. I just want to quickly reiterate that we do have that crosswalk online on the project webpage. We'll be continually updating that as we work with BDS to actually assign what the new addresses are. I think it's worth very briefly mentioning that there was some testimony about the / and the address. I would say a good chunk of the calls that I've gotten has not been from people concerned about the address change, just because people forget that they own a vacant lot, and so they might be at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Southwest Military Road, but they have a vacant tax lot that's WI / 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Southwest Military Road. And all I literally did is wanted to give full disclosure to everybody. Here's the new address for the house, for the property you own with a house on it. Here's the new address for your vacant lot. As I mentioned, out of turn, apologies, didn't quite know how the PSC sequence of events worked. But as I mentioned slightly out of turn, we are just notifying people of what their address will be for the vacant lot. To your question, we do an annual CGIS, and I don't know what CGIS stands for, but we do an annual update where we push out the street center lines to the major folks like the car manufacturers and all those folks. And so there will be an annual update process. So in 2020, we'll start pushing out those new street center lines without the leading zero addresses. And those center lines will have been pushed out over a 5-year period. So basically, by the time that we retire the old addresses, and I want to make a correction on the PowerPoint. I just noticed that May 2027 should be May 2025. So I apologize for that typo, and please note that as a correction. So between May of 2020 and May of 2025, we'll be pushing out 5 annual updates. Obviously, not everybody replaces their car in 5 years, but I drive my car around and it still has Portland Boulevard, and it still has some of the old street names. So that's just kind of a normal and customary thing with respect to databases. So, but we'll also be working with the big folks like Google and Amazon and all those folks that are part of that CGIS update.
So, relative to the post office, do you know when you'll have a response from the post office of how they will treat the change?
I should be able to, at least, if nothing else, get an answer from the city of Hillsborough on how that works. I mean, candidly, Commissioner, I was looking to reach out to the post office after the policy decision had been made to change everything, just given that we were 2 years out from changing it. I'm more than happy to reach out. I'll make that phone call to the city of Hillsborough and see what their experience was.
Well, the concern is, and this is when 39th was changed to Cesar Chavez, I don't remember all the process, but there's a process that the post office follows the city, and when the city makes a change, they make a change, and then they push the residents and businesses to change, because at some point,
right
there, and that timeline may not be 5 years, is what I'm indicating. If all of a sudden the city makes a change in 2 years and pushes that out, the post office may follow very quickly. So I would hope we would have an answer before, rather than not rely on Hillsborough, but directly from the post office around their policy and practice of how they will follow the city in their changes.
Yeah, let me just clarify one thing, Commissioner. Really what we're asking from the PSC and Council is a policy decision on whether we should have a 6th addressing sector. The question of exactly what addresses change to what is under the purview of the Bureau of Development Services. The question of timing is something that we'll have to implement. So I just want to be really clear. If I call up the post office tomorrow and they say, yep, we're right behind you, we'll be there in May of 2020, we'll be there, every step of the way, and then 18 months from now there's a problem, we will have the flexibility written into the council ordinance that if something needs to delay or what have you, that we have the flexibility to do that. So we're not asking the PSC nor the council to put one thing in motion before something else is ready. I'm very comfortable that we've outlined a timeline that will work, but if we run into a glitch and there's a delay, then we won't move one step ahead of where we ought to be. I mean, the key is to understand that there can be 4 large notifications. The second notification will be in the summer after the policy change has been made. The third notification will be the key one. That'll be, we're looking to roll this out with the new street signs. I still have to talk to maintenance operations and say, well, how many crews do you have? What month are you going to start putting up the new South Portland street signs? Is it going to be May? Is it going to be June? Is it going to be July? I don't know the answer to that. So the reality is, the May is the target date, but there will be some adjustments as we go through this, and that will be communicated to all the affected property owners in advance of that change happening.
Thank you. Eli, Mike, and then Andreas.
Well, I think that for public safety, I understand the arguments for this, although I am concerned about mathematical accuracy, because we're already out of compliance by having 5 quadrants in the city. This will bring us further out of compliance to have 6 quadrants. I'm just curious if there's a 7th or 8th coming, and I've been here long enough to become accustomed to the fact that we have a 40-mile loop that's not a loop and it's 140 miles. And I'm just wondering the implications for that. Although the good note is that perhaps there'll be a 6th quadrant brew pub for me to visit at some point in the future, if this passes.
Go ahead.
I just want to go on record. I'm going to retire before we adopt another addressing sector. But
well, I've listened to 2 presentations now, and I'm personally ready to move on with this issue.
Andreas?
I appreciate the focus on public safety. I'd echo comments that would be good to hear from dispatch and not just police and fire, but also emergency medical response. And then talking to BPS staff, they've flagged challenges in geocoding addresses with leading zeros, and I think we dealt with dashes, but that was a separate issue. I think the only thing is there some effort to coordinate with the census process for reviewing local address changes to the census?
The census. So you're talking about the 2020 census?
Correct.
You know, I have to say that had not occurred to me. Be fully honest with you.
I think that would be something good to plug into, just carrying what I've heard from BPS. And yeah, I really appreciate the efforts you've been making to facilitate the address change process for people with the Multnomah Athletic Club, and I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, and more things like that I think would make the process a lot smoother for the residents.
Thank you. And not that this is the bar we want to set, but I did talk to TriMet shortly after I gave you folks the briefing. And they had mentioned another jurisdiction. I don't want to name that jurisdiction publicly, but they had named another jurisdiction that they were way down the track, and they had made all their addresses changes, and they basically found out a couple months before that they had, and they muddled through and got it done. That is absolutely not my bar, okay? But I'm just saying that I honestly believe that our level of outreach to everybody, minus the post office, is unprecedented. I think this has been very proactive in terms of reaching out to folks. And I'm confident that it'll go much more smoothly, not without hiccups, but much more smoothly than what we've seen in the past.
Michelle and then Chris.
So my only concern about it is just making sure people have an adequate transition period. So a lot of that is the post office. Do we have a sense of the ID documents like passports and driver's license, what the requirements would be associated with, how timely you have to be in getting those changed?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So I've already actually reached out to ODOT, and I'm not looking to make them front and center here, but I've already reached out to ODOT and said, look, wouldn't it make a lot more sense? I mean, I can't imagine me being less popular than asking 5,027 people to go sit in line at the DMV to change their addresses. So one of the things that I've talked to ODOT about is, can we just do something similar to what I hope the Multnomah Athletic Club will want to do, is can we just provide the crosswalk and get all of that just updated globally, just so that people don't have to go through the process on their own. I'm sorry, you had another question, Commissioner?
So ODOT would send you a sticker to put on your driver's license?
I think that's the concept, and I don't want to speak for ODOT, okay, but that's the concept we're imagining.
And the other was passports?
Yeah, that's something I'll talk to the city of Hillsborough about that and see what they know, and I'll talk to the post office and try to get you some answers on that. I do know passports run for 10 years, and this in theory, if you renewed your passport yesterday, it wouldn't get renewed until after all the old Southwest Portland street signs came down. So we just got to work through that issue. So.
Go ahead, Chris.
So I want to address the piece of testimony we did get from the South Portland Business Association, which was the only testimony sort of adamantly opposed to this. And yeah, their point was basically there are a lot of costs for the businesses that have these addresses. I think you've addressed the transition period largely. I am still interested in the post office response, but generally I think your plan will ease the burden for businesses. And I will comment, as I did it when you briefed us, that I was on the other side of this helping a nonprofit theater with their mailing address software, and there was time and effort involved in making the leading zeros work there. So there are expenses borne by businesses probably around the city and around the country to get mail to these people, these addresses. So I think if there are costs, there are countervailing costs on the other side to some degree. So I will go ahead and make a motion that we endorse the creation of the sixth quadrant and the South Portland addressing. I would, I think, want to include in our letter to council that by the time we get to council, we should have clear expectations for how the post office will handle the transition. Will they support it for 5 years, or is there a shorter period? We should have a little more definitive knowledge about that. But so moved.
Any further questions or comments? The motion, Andre?
Just the only comment. I'm very supportive of this. I really do like the idea that emergency services will be more efficient in getting to people, because that really is critical about time and saving lives and property and things. So thank you. I mean, this is critical in that. My concern is, as Chris said, is that before council, that there's a clear timeline from the Postal Service of when they will cut and force people to use this address based upon our timeline, and so that people have that clear expectation, because I think you do have time for transition, and that's always important given history. But if the timeline changes, I'm not confident that if it all passes and then we got to come back and scramble, that people will get that time. So
Sure.
Before council makes a decision, if the post office can be contacted directly and we have an official response of how they will timeline it out, would be perfect. But I'm supportive of Chris's recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just think having that in a letter from the PSC would really help me, because it's just something that I can take to the post office, and I would certainly welcome that. I just did want to clarify for the record, is there any objection to me just sending an updated PowerPoint to Julie with that last date corrected to May of 2025? I just want to your point, Commissioner, I don't want this to go on the e-file with the wrong date on there and people think they have 2 more years to actually change this. So
That would be appreciated.
thank you. And I really appreciate all the guidance that all of you have given me, and look forward to hitting the ground running on this.
Okay, so any other further comments or questions before we call the roll? I'll just kind of quickly add, as someone affected by this, also very supportive of the policy. And we've talked about it before. I do think it's going to be critical that when your mailers go out to those who are affected by it, is reminders of those issues that maybe you aren't able to handle on the backside. So if you can't take care of ODOT, then reminders to do that, reminders about passports and kind of timelines for that, I think would be very helpful for people. And I know we've already talked about you doing that, so I'm sure that'll happen. With that, Julie, do you want to call the roll, please?
Sure. Backrack.
Yes.
Law.
Yes.
Bortolaccio.
Yes.
Hauk.
I'm really impressed with the staff work on this. Yes.
Red.
Yes.
Smith.
Thank you for the good work, Andrew. Yes.
Spivak.
Yes.
St. Martin. Yes. Schultz.
Appreciate all your time, effort, and clarity of presentation. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a social equity investment strategy and displacement risk analysis. I believe we have presenting Tom Armstrong, Tyler Bump, and Nick Coble. Please go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm Tom Armstrong with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. We have a presentation here for you that starts with an update of some of the information that we initially did for the 2035 comp plan, especially with respect to the displacement risk analysis that we did and our social equity investment strategy diagram that's in the comp plan. And then after going through those updates, we're going to turn things over to Tyler that's going to talk about how we use these tools going forward when we're making decisions, especially with respect to zoning code changes and zoning map changes. And Tyler will talk about how we use this in the residential infill project and coming up with our coming up with our staff recommendations for that and how you can use this tool as a way to guide your decision making. Just to start and to ground everybody, we have just some basic definitions about what we mean about gentrification and displacement. So really, gentrification is an undervalued neighborhood that suddenly or over time becomes more desirable. And with that desirability, attractiveness, property values rise, rents rise, and eventually you have what we call economic displacement. People can no longer afford to live there, especially in terms of rent. And then there's a change in the neighborhood, often a turnover. Often there's a racial aspect, a racial ethnic aspect to the neighborhood and to the businesses. And that results in displacement. And so that what we're largely talking about today is an involuntary displacement, not a direct displacement. Somebody's home or business is condemned and bulldozed and converted to some other use, but that creeping, rising rent that I can no longer afford to live there or stay in business there, or in some respects, the people around me have changed, and my business service is no longer suits the neighborhood, and that's what we've seen in inner, especially in inner northeast Portland, as the African American community has been displaced. First the residents, and then and now the businesses, often to East Portland, and so that sort of situation and dynamic is really what has been driving this look and trying to be more sensitive to identifying what people and what neighborhoods are at risk of displacement and gentrification, and how our public decision making, either through zoning decisions or through public infrastructure investments, can influence and exacerbate that condition. Just a reminder, we have a number of different policies in the comp plan that speak to this issue. We've highlighted two here that really get at this idea that when we go to make decisions about plans and investments, that we have to look at those anticipated impacts and also identify and implement mitigation strategies as part of that decision-making package. And that, I think the residential infill project is going to be the first big project to really test and explore what these policies mean and how you mitigate those anticipated impacts. And so it'll be a learning process for both of us as we go through. But the purpose of this presentation was to really ground you in that risk analysis and how we can apply that in the residential infill project. So I'm going to turn things over to Nick, who's been our lead on updating the gentrification risk analysis. We first did this back in 2012 with Professor Lisa Bates from Portland State, helped us come up with this methodology and looking at these vulnerability factors and pulling all this together. That was based on 2010 census data. We have now gone through, and Nick will explain some of the changes we've made to use the most recently available American Community Survey data in terms of the demographic changes, but also the 6 or 7 years of real estate market changes that have gone on and how that has played out in our risk analysis. So I'm going to turn things over to Nick.
Thanks. So Tom gave us the premise for some of the work that we're doing around this, and I'm going to give you a little more background on some of the changes we've seen this past decade, and I'll also touch on some of the mechanics of the typology. Tom mentioned that, as a reminder where we left off, this is the gentrification displacement typology that Dr. Bates provided for us in 2012. She also partnered with us on the Division BRT project. In 2012, parts of Northeast, Cully, St. John's were actively undergoing gentrification, while the Powell Corridor and 82nd Avenue corridor were in early stages of gentrification. So let's explore some of the factors that go into making up the typology, as well as some of the demographic and housing changes we've seen since 2000. The definitions of gentrification and displacement that Tom offer us give us some clarity on what it is, but to develop some kind of assessment on the neighborhood level risk, we did turn to the previous work of Dr. Bates. Her assessment looks at three main factors: vulnerability to shifting economic tides, demographic change, and housing market conditions. And the first part we're going to start to look at is vulnerable communities. This map shows the relative concentration of communities who are vulnerable to economic pressures. The darker purple areas have more renters as opposed to homeowners. They have more people of color. They have more adults without a four-year degree, and they have a higher share of low-income households. The hatched areas in blue are those that have a higher share of communities of color specifically. An area with a score of 10 or more is generally considered vulnerable for the purposes of this methodology. The second factor in developing typology is demographic change, which indicates whether an area has experienced a decrease in its share of vulnerable communities. The changes we've seen citywide across these four vulnerability factors are shown here on this slide. Since 2000, we've added more communities of color. More households are now renters as opposed to homeowners. Adults are reaching higher educational attainment, and our ability to hang on to lower income households is waning. These demographic changes suggest that while we're gaining some vulnerable communities, we're losing others. We looked at census tracts that have experienced demographic change across these four factors between 2010 and 2016. We defined demographic change as a loss in the share of vulnerable communities. The vulnerable tracts that with a score of 10 or higher that I mentioned a moment ago are shown hatched out in purple on this map, while the tracts that have experienced faster than average change in demographic composition are shown in orange. Many of the inner neighborhoods experienced change in the past 5 to 10 years, but North Portland, Parkrose, Glenfair Wilkes, and West Portland near Ash Creek and Crestwood have also experienced some demographic change. The third factor in developing typology is the changes we've seen in the housing market. The typology distinguishes three conditions based on how the price of homes or rents have changed in the past few years. We'll discuss these typologies in a moment, but let's review some of the citywide housing affordability. So last month I showed you these series of maps on housing affordability where the blue dots were home sales that were affordable to the average family and the orange dots were unaffordable. In 2000, about 70% of home sales were affordable to the average family. By 2007, only about 21% were affordable. And by 2017, fewer than 10% of home sales were affordable, with only some in East Portland, Brentwood-Darlington, and in parts of St. John's. Again, this chart summarizes the trend since 2000. What it doesn't tell, though, is the story of what the average family of color might feel whose incomes are much lower, and the chart doesn't tell the story of rents, which have steadily increased since 2012, but we've seen some recent relief and some stabilization in rents. To contextualize these trends into the region as a whole, Portland's housing market is hot, but a lot of other places have a hot market as well. Only parts of Forest Grove, Vancouver, and East County remain affordable with homes under $350,000. So not only are homes becoming unaffordable in Portland, but there are a few places even within our region that are affordable to purchase a home. But not all areas in the city experience the same rate and manner of home value and rental appreciation. This map shows the housing market condition at a more granular level using these three primary conditions. So the first is accelerating, which is shown in orange. Those are areas that currently have a low or moderate housing values, but their market is quickly appreciating, has quickly appreciated in the past few years. Adjacent in yellow are those that still have a lower moderate housing value, but they are next to a market that has high values or that has seen quickly rising values. And lastly, appreciated in red are those areas that used to be low or moderate in 2000, but they've since climbed to the top of the spectrum. So we can layer these three factors together on vulnerability, demographic change, and housing market condition to arrive at our final updated gentrification typology, which is shown here. And these are the typologies we've come up with, ranging from early stages in yellow and orange to late stages in blue. And Tyler is going to talk more about these 7 risk factors, 7 risk typologies.
Commissioner, thanks for having us again. Tyler Bum, Senior Economic Planner, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I'm going to go real quickly over the changes in the sort of breakdown of these risk typologies as we're looking at them. One thing I think is worth pointing out, I will go into some area-specific looks, and so that we could look at general trends in different parts of the city, North Portland, Northeast, parts of East Portland, Southeast, as well as sort of downtown. So that we can look and see specifically how things have changed since the original displacement risk analysis that Dr. Bates did in 2012. The risk typologies that Nick just outlined the methodology for fall into these 7 categories, and generally they will break down like this as we're looking thematically through the maps here. The yellow sections or the yellow areas for the most part have vulnerable populations but haven't seen significant demographic change in the previous years that we're looking, but do have market conditions that are accelerating or adjacent to accelerating areas. The red, orangish colors have vulnerable populations, have seen demographic change in the last period, in the last time series that we're looking at here, and have the next bump up in market conditions that they're either adjacent or accelerating as well. The top 3 are these blue. These are sort of continued loss or late gentrification risk areas. These are areas that at one point had a vulnerable population, or in the case of late type 1, do have a vulnerable population still, are seeing ongoing demographic change with a higher share of white households and higher income, more educated households moving into those areas as well. And the market conditions for those areas are generally appreciated or accelerating. So in the terms of prices for houses, when we're looking around, we're looking at areas that generally are above $500,000 for a single family house, rents that are $1,300 to $1,500 for a studio or 1-bedroom apartment. So these are areas that are or have appreciated or are at the point of being higher than the citywide average as a whole. So this is the 2010 to 2016 methodology compared to the 2000 to 2010. There's some pretty big spatial differences and changes in this typology here we'll get into. The first one we'll point out here is North Portland. This is the North Portland in the original 2012 Dr. Bates methodology. North Portland saw some parts of that north section, north of north of Fessenden, the sort of northwest corner of St. John's is undergoing dynamic gentrification with some other parts in Cathedral Park, and that yellow area in Portsmouth that were either early or susceptible. When we look from 2010 to 2016, most everything has jumped a spot at least. One very concerning area is that East Portsmouth, West Kenton census tract that you see there that skipped altogether the susceptible and early types and went directly to dynamic. So that was an area that has seen significant market appreciation as well as significant demographic change in this 2010 to 2016 time period. The rest of St. John's generally got moved to dynamic in the areas that were either susceptible or stable in the previous methodology have moved to early type 1. The next one is Inner North Northeast. Driving a lot of our policy conversation and programming has been this policy focus on the impact of displacement on communities of color and low-income households in Inner North Northeast. In 2000 to 2010, there were a significant amount of Inner North Northeast census tracts that were in this dynamic phase. When we've done the update, most of those have moved to the late Type 1, Type 2 continued loss, which is ongoing demographic change and an increasing share of higher income households in those areas. The next one is Cully, sort of middle northeast, mid northeast areas. Cully in 2010 had dynamic early type 2 that was seeing demographic change, and then along 82nd in Madison South Montevilla were areas that were susceptible. In the newest update, a lot of those areas in Montevilla or Madison South along 82nd, both on the east and west side of 82nd, but west of 205, and this little look right here, have gone to early type 1, where before they were susceptible. So everything's kind of gone up a notch, with the exception of that Montevilla, North Tabor-ish type blue color.
Is it what? Yeah.
Right there. Has gone directly to late type 2. So that's one that had skipped an entire typology and dynamic and gone to significant demographic change. Cully is an interesting one. Cully has actually gone from dynamic in parts of Cully to early type 1 as the community has seen an increase in share of communities of color. There's been a lot of great community organizing work and community development work that's been done in Cully. And I think that that's an indication of the stability or relative stability that Cully has seen as other areas have changed significantly in this period of time. The next area is Southeast. There were parts, as Nick had mentioned, there were parts of Southeast along the Powell corridor that were susceptible or early in the last methodology. And when we update this one, those had all, again, skipped to dynamic or late, with the addition of more intense early and sometimes late in the case of Brentwood Darlington on that south end there in that blue chunk, in that blue census tract. But all of Lentz now and Brentwood Darlington are either early or late change as well. The sort of inner southeast central city saw some changes. Most inner southeast neighborhoods, really close in southeast neighborhoods and northeast along Kearns, were continued loss in the previous approach, and those have gone out completely for the most part. Parts of Buckman still remain. There's some new susceptible tracks. When we've looked into the detail on the data for those specifically, we've seen a huge increase in renter households along with the new construction of multifamily rentals that have happened in that area, and an increase in the student population specifically around PSU. So there is, and you can see a little bit of that happening along Reed as well. So there is some student population that's driving some of these changes as well. And then the big story here is East Portland and the stability in the previous 2012 approach, 2012 methodology. And the most recent one is this map here. And in the engagement, I wish Katie were here right now. In the engagement that we've done with East Portland over the last couple of years, I mean, this is something that when we go out to the community, we hear every single time that we're there, is that the community in East Portland is seeing the impacts of displacement at the household level, at the block level, at the neighborhood level, at the school district level. And for the really, right now, this last update with the 4-year ACS estimates have really shown the stark changes that have been happening, specifically these red areas in Park Rose, Centennial Glenfair in the Rosewood neighborhood or Rosewood area, and then a little small portion of Palhurst Gilbert along 122nd and Division are areas that have seen demographic change, increasing market conditions. Everything else has vulnerable communities seeing market change, increasing market pressures, but the demographic changes haven't occurred in those early areas yet. But those 3 areas that I just mentioned have are starting to see significant demographic change in the data. I should note too that this isn't this approach, this typology isn't predictive, and that's a downfall, I think, of us being able to predict what our impacts of our plans or investments will have in areas. The data that we have is already old. So, we're looking at 2012 to 2016 ACS estimates. So in reality, this data is representing 2014, 2015 time series data here. So there's already significant changes that have happened since this data has come out, which just came out a few months ago. So I do want to sort of acknowledge the technical limitations in the data and our ability to respond and see these changes that are happening in real time. The typologies by the numbers, far and away the largest share of population and households are in the early type 1 typology, and that's reflective in the map in East Portland specifically, and the large area that is now early type 1 in East Portland, with a big chunk of households and population, and the dynamic are currently undergoing gentrification as well in that typology.
Why don't you go back? So I think we'll just pause there and see if there's any questions about this displacement risk analysis and gentrification typology.
Andre, looks like then Jeff.
Stark numbers to say the least. The change in the typology, that last slide that you have, do you have that from like 2000? So you could say the number of tracks, you could see the change in tracks from each of the categories to where we are today?
Go ahead.
Yeah, the 2012 report that Dr. Bates provided for us took a similar approach with the tracks. I can get it quickly. If I had a laptop on me, I could do it right now. Crunch the numbers. But no, it's available.
Okay. It just at some point, if we could get like a comparison, here's what the original one, here's where we're today, and see that kind of, I guess, change.
Mm-hmm. We're still working on the report, and ultimately we're going to be publishing something that will be sent out to you all commissioners, as well as posted on our website. So we'll make sure that that's part of the report, and we'll talk about that and the narrative of change in aggregate in these typologies as well. And we'll definitely make sure to keep that in there.
The last question is, you're talking about affordable households and early type. Is there a graphic that would overlay to say typical household? So the change, you know what the typical household value they would have to be to live in that neighborhood today versus, let's say, back in Bates. So if 80%, if it was, I'm just going to pull a number, 50,000, and today to live in the same neighborhood, that is continued loss, you need to have a average income of 100,000. That gives you a dynamic of change of income level. Just a question.
Yeah, it's something we can look into the data and see if we can better tie the cost piece along with the income piece on the map.
Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting stuff. We've been seeing a lot of the same information, sort of packaged and analyzed differently, but it all tells us the march of creating an unaffordable housing market. I'm wondering, as you create these typologies, as you call them, is there anything you've looked at that shows where it's a public investment that's caused a disruption? We know the marketplace itself is creating the affordability problem. Inner city's gotten more popular, prices go up, and it sort of marches outward. But is there anything, because I think the original concept when the city sort of started recognizing this gentrification issue is when the city makes an investment. We're not doing as much urban renewal as we used to, but is there anything in this that shows that a city investment disrupted the marketplace? In other words, we know the marketplace itself is doing this, but is there any evidence that shows in an urban renewal area we caused more disruption than the normal marketplace, or that the city did better with its investment and sort of slowed down the disruption?
I don't think we can make that direct connection, so to speak, and we'll get into that a little bit in the next piece as what we call the social equity investment strategy, as being more conscious about that effect when you go to make a public investment, especially larger public investments like the Southwest Corridor, Division Transit, or even parks, that you want to be not just making those investments to make the community better, but you need to bring the housing programs and the community capacity building at the same time. But we can get that deeper into that in a minute.
And just to jump ahead, and we may not be ready to jump ahead, is you said this risk analysis is going to help us when we look at the residential infill project. So it's hard to evaluate the displacement effect when there's an actual tangible investment of public dollars.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to guess it's even harder to analyze an impact of a zone change on displacement, but you're going to get us there, which I'll be very interested to see how we use risk analysis when we're looking at code changes.
I'm not sure I would use the phrase "get you there." We're gonna provide more information for you to think about as you make a decision.
You gave me a premise statement about this is going to give us a risk analysis for when we do residential infill, and I'm very curious to see how we get there. But I'll wait and see.
And
thank you,
Commissioner Bachrach, to answer a little bit of your first part of the question, I do think we want to acknowledge that there are significant investments that municipalities and cities have made before that have exacerbated this problem, and we haven't addressed those in the way that we needed to in the past. It's not necessarily URA as a tool that has done it, but it's the types of investments, regardless of the financing mechanism, of where we've done that and how we've done it. And so the different kinds of investments have different impacts. And there's a whole bunch of literature and research that's been done using multivariate regression analysis to figure out what kinds of projects have the most impact on certain communities. So there's a lot of research out there that if you're interested in, I could help.
No, and just to clarify my point, I mean, I'm well aware that the city has to do and has begun to do a better job when they're making investments to be sure, for example, that there's affordable housing and that we're conscious of the mistakes that were made in the past. Absolutely need to do that. I was just jumping ahead to, I'm trying to understand how we do that with a zone change that doesn't involve a public investment. But
right.
So I believe Mike had some questions, and then we'll just go Teresa, Ben, Michelle.
Yeah, regarding one specific example, when Interstate Light Rail went in, I know there was a racial impact statement that was utilized in that process, as I recall. Do we have data from at least that one example where there was a very substantial public investment and what the impacts were?
Yeah, I think there has been some of that, and I think what is complicated and one of the issues that will be in the residential infill project decision and other decisions is, when the interstate urban renewal area was first set up, it included both investment in light rail and sort of a social equity investment program, and then there was a court decision that wiped out half the value of the urban renewal agency, and the city was forced with a decision: do we do light rail or not? And at the time, they decided to do light rail, knowing they did have the money for that social equity program that was all laid out in the urban renewal program, but they had to make that tough decision, and we see the results of that now, 20 years later.
Okay, so I have a couple of comments or questions. The first is, my assumption is once you move down the chart, you either stay where you're at, but you don't go backwards. So we don't go from dynamic back to type 2. Once you get there, is that correct?
There's one example, and that's the Cully neighborhood specifically that has gone, there's hard lines here, and you can be a little bit above the line and a little bit below the line. So where you land is, at a certain point in time, is a little bit dependent. There has to be some threshold to be, yes, you're in dynamic or you're in early type 1. So it's hard to say specifically how far one has gone from the other. But for the most part, we haven't seen too many areas outside of a couple of those census tracts in Cully that have become less subject or less likely for involuntary displacement to occur.
Okay, and given that and the rate of change, which is pretty alarming, my question that I wonder about, which I don't expect you to answer at this moment in time, is how long do we have before it's too late? Because I know that, we don't have correlated data for predictive modeling, but given an economy that remains strong, and that rate of change, is this like, don't do anything for 5 years and you're done? Don't do anything for 2 years and you're done? So, like I said, I don't expect you to answer that, but that's where my mind is going.
We can provide. There's really good information out of UC Berkeley for the Bay Area, and the if we think that they're ahead of us and how those how those areas and where those vulnerable communities live in the Bay Area, and how, like parts of Oakland have changed over time, that may give us some indication as to where that goes, and we can provide links. They have some nice online map tools that you can explore around if you're familiar with the Bay Area.
I also think it's worth noting that we do have a set of tools, a toolkit, and a set of programs that have been discussed both through Dr. Bates's original work in 2012, as well as tools that the Anti-Displacement PDX Coalition has brought forward in part of our discussion with the comp plan, that there's some real need for community investment and community capacity building to be able to stem this tide too. So how do we programmatically support that at the same time making these policy and investment decisions, I think is really critical.
Ben? And then Michelle.
Well, first of all, thank you for doing this analysis. I really like the way it's displayed and graphically really clear. Question, is the boundary of the analysis the city of Portland? Yeah. So I wonder if there's any data that you've observed, and it might be just anecdotal, by looking beyond the boundary. I'm wondering whether some of the migration that happened, the movement of population, actually might tell an even more stark story by, for instance, as we observe income going up relatively across the board at different levels, but across the board within the city, if there has been displacement of lower income people that actually went outside of the boundary, maybe east or south, that if we actually look at that even more globally, I'm not saying do an analysis at a wider area, but if there are some things that you observed to that effect.
I think we've certainly seen that in the Rockwood area of Gresham, which is just east of Portland, and anecdotally have heard some of that in Clackamas County, and certainly in sort of the moderate to the sort of lower upper income households, sort of moving to Milwaukee when they can't afford inner Portland. Sort of, especially in terms of home sales and those sort of upper middle income households going to close in Milwaukee, close in Clackamas County, and lower income going further south into Clackamas County. But certainly have seen the data and the pattern in the Rockwood area of Gresham as being sort of outer East Portland, as part of that displacement landing zone.
One thing that I think we sometimes forget to mention is the proximity to Clark County, which happens to be in a different state, but is only 10 miles away or 5 to 10 miles away. And there's a large share of folks that have moved to Clark County, whether that was voluntary or involuntary. One of the things that I'm really interested in on a professional level is tracking this commute shed data of workers and where folks live and where they work. And we have seen a significant increase in commute trips to Vancouver, in and out of Vancouver. How much of that is tied to this, I don't know, but there is definitely a regional piece that's driving this. It's probably a good plug for Metro's Equitable Housing Initiative also. Emily Lieb, the Equitable Housing Program Manager at Metro, is doing some really great work around some of this stuff regionally as well.
So clearly we have a housing issue here that we need to address. Place I sort of struggle is figuring out how much is voluntary versus involuntary. And part of that is looking at age demographics. I can think of a couple of examples I know of in California where people lived in a neighborhood that was gentrifying, but they were also getting older. And so they sold the house, they realized that appreciation, and that's paying for a place that's more suitable to their later years. And so how do we sort of get our hands around recognizing we still need to deal with the fact that we're losing opportunities for people to move in, but people are also relying on this appreciation, and some of it is voluntary.
Yeah, that's that sort of the age dynamic change is not something that, and especially sort of net change of not just adding a bunch of young households to a certain census tract, but how many older households are dropping out is not a factor that we've looked at very closely, but it could be driving that.
So I have just a couple questions, and one is on Cully, where we're kind of seeing maybe a step back. And you were commenting on some great community work there that may be attributing to that, or you think it is. I don't know if you were definitive on that. But I'm curious, and here's a little bit of the conundrum: is great that perhaps we've got less displacement, but are we also seeing the fact that property values then are being not as rapidly increasing, and so are those with property besides renters? How do they feel about the fact that perhaps they've seen more of a leveling off, let's say, compared to other areas? So I guess I'm struggling a little bit with kind of some great community work that hopefully is helping to keep some renters and businesses in place, but then you may or may not, and I don't know if you've gotten any comments on that from actual property owners about, hold it, how is this affecting me?
So one of the things with Cully back to 2012 when we first did this is, and part of this is when you have any given project, sort of doing that deeper dive. And one of the things that we knew about Cully back then was it was made up of more low-income homeowners. So they have a little bit more ability to hang on in a rising market because of their ownership position. So that may be one factor that's sort of helping them be a little bit more stable when everything else around them is accelerating in value.
And I guess part of my question is, so if I'm a low-income homeowner, I may hope for more change in my property values. Yet if we're making efforts to try to decrease the amount of change in that area, how does the community feel about it?
Right. Hold that thought, because that becomes a key issue in the residential infill project and how you make a decision in there.
On the values piece in here, this early, I want to clarify, early type 1 is accelerating, or those are accelerating values for rents and homeownership in those areas. It's just that the rate of demographic change has decreased. So the values are still going up. Nick somehow just pulled up median sales value in Cully tracks over the last, from 2007 to 2011. And they've increased significantly, both from a 2007 peak as well as a sort of recession trough. And so home median price in the neighborhood has gone up significantly. So this is the early type 1 typology that's here is, yes, vulnerable population, not as much demographic change, but accelerating market condition is what that orange color is.
But having had it take a step back.
Can I quickly jump in there?
Yeah, please.
So the one thing to remember is that can you flip back to the other one? Or the next one, rather. So no, just go back. So it jumped from dynamic in this 2000 to 2010 period. That was the period of analysis. And then in another period of analysis, set that aside. In this period, we did not experience demographic change that was faster than average. But in the previous period, we did. So if you did, say, for example, from 2000 to 2016, it might look different. But that's one thing to keep in mind, is that you have to look at these two time periods a little bit together, but also kind of separately.
But it also seems like maybe there's a stabilization of demographic change that's happened there.
It's the rate of change.
Right.
The city as a whole is changing. Cully is not changing as fast.
Rapidly.
Yeah, it's
Correct.
definitely all relative.
Correct.
But there is still displacement occurring in Cully. I do want to clarify that it's not changing. It is changing, and when we go out and have conversations with either the community organizations, Living Cully or Hacienda or Habitat or the neighborhood association, I mean, we have not ever heard that things in Cully are not changing right now. So I do want to be clear that things are changing in Cully.
If I defer to Eli, since my question was going to be, and Eli, maybe this is what you're going to help us with, is there something positive going on in Cully that we should be trying to replicate and understand, or is it just sort of the quirk of the data? And that's, Eli, maybe you know Cully better than any of us.
Well, I live in Cully. That's true. if I were going to, on the ground, my suspicion is that the explanation for this data is partly long-time, relatively low-income homeowners, and the fact that there's a couple nonprofits that own a lot of affordable housing rental in those jurisdictions. So you have low-income renters, stable, homeowners, stable, and although there's lots of community organizing work going on, the number of newly created affordable or stable units is almost nothing. It's not an urban renewal area. We don't have those tools that exist in some parts of the city. And my suspicion is that this is a little bit of a culprit of the 2016 data set you're working from. And there has been a lot in the past year or two of increases of value and displacement from that that don't yet show up on these graphs. And I guess I wanted to check up on maybe the one graph before this one. If you can go back. Oop, there. Okay, well, I just want to make sure I'm reading this right. So things that are stable, does that mean demographically stable, or because close-in neighborhoods of Portland, prices have been going up like crazy, lots of displacement, all whites mostly, and is because I guess I wouldn't want us to think that, like, there's two types of stable, it seems like, if I'm getting this right. There's the East County stable, and maybe the West Side stable to some extent, where the values have been not changing that much. And you've also got the close-in Portland stable, which means that the demography is not changing much, but there still could be lots of displacement happening. Am I reading that correctly? Like someone buying a $1.2 million house and displacing two people with $600,000 budgets.
These are places that just don't fit into the typology whatsoever. In Dr. Bates's previous work, it was just unnamed. We didn't have a name for it, but now we're just calling them stable, meaning there's no, if they are vulnerable, then there's no demographic change, and there's nothing going on with their housing market. If they are vulnerable, then there's still nothing going on with the demographic change in the housing market. So it's more related to.
This is more around vulnerability than it is around change. So areas that are vulnerable to displacement. So as a baseline, we're looking at areas that have some threshold of vulnerability. Some of these do, some of these don't. Some of them have that displacement or gentrification has occurred in previous points of time. So in the case of some of these inner southeast neighborhoods, that may have happened in the 90s, or it may have happened in the early 2000s. And when we look at this period of time, it's not reflected in here. One of the things that other sort of typologies or ways of looking at this has another way of looking at areas of advanced exclusion, and I think it's important to realize that we do have parts of our city and parts of a lot of cities that do have this ongoing advanced exclusion that has historic racial policy and finance-driven issues around them. But to get to your point, it's a little bit of both. But some things, when we're looking at this time series analysis and these chunks over time, it makes it hard to sort of look at those separately.
So it might be accurate to say that in some of the earlier year periods, the East County would have been stable in what I usually think of as the term stable.
Right.
But in this 2010 to 2016, the labeling of stable for a whole bunch of inner East Side is probably not going to track with what I intuitively think of as stable.
It's stable for a higher income share of our population, or higher income households for the most part. So these are areas that aren't seeing significant demographic change,
right? But
change.
Higher, they're higher income households displacing not as high income households, but they're both demographically very similar to one another. Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or maybe, I'm not saying Dr. Bates studied this specifically. I'm not saying this needs to be the main study, but I'm just being hit by the stable label for an area of the city I know is not stable in the way I think of it. Thanks.
And so, one last question before we move on, and this is kind of a piggyback to Teresa's comment about, in a way, how much more time before we find we're all blue. And you showed in kind of a previous briefing home prices prior to recession, and then kind of how we've gone since the recession. And we saw changes, certainly at that time, with property values decreasing in the recession. And we happen to know, this last recession was very tied to the home market. So this might be a difficult question, but there will be at some point an economic downturn. Granted, the dynamics may or may not be so tied to home values. And I guess where I'm trying to figure out is, as much as we're kind of using this as a tool, trying to understand maybe is there any correlation with a potential downturn or a future downturn and taking advantage of home prices maybe dropping back, and how do we make that a positive instead of a negative versus we're past the point of no return. Maybe, it's like the opposite. I guess, foil to Teresa's question of maybe there is some hope in a downturn and that we can find some areas and use that opportunity. Opportunity is just a really bad word to use with a downturn,
Right.
but you see what I'm getting at.
Right.
To kind of target where might that be and how do we think about that?
Right, and I think that's where, especially in the last downturn, but probably you could predict in the next downturn that initially it's the homeowners, the lower income homeowners that get hurt the most, that lose their job, don't have the wealth to and fall behind on their mortgages. And so to the extent that there are sort of loan modification programs and other assistance available to keep them in their home, I just read an article the other day about New York City having a program where they're actually going out and buying distressed mortgages and then working with the owners to modify, or even if they can't stay, then have a nonprofit buy it and and have them become renters in their own homes, sort of thing. So I think that's sort of I would think is the people that are going to feel the bite the first in the recession. If the recession slows job growth, slows population growth, you might see less upward pressure on rents or even a drop in rents. And so that could provide some stability there. But I think it's the lower income homeowners that are going to be most at risk at the beginning of that downturn.
Thinking out loud here, the surest path to increasing wealth is homeownership. And so one of the major questions we're going to be wrestling with in the residential infill is it really targeted to specific areas of the city, or is it broader? That's a fundamental question. And it seems to me that and I've heard this argument made, that if it's more broadly applied, that allows homeowners to increase their wealth via ADUs, via whatever action they want to take that actually increases their wealth, which is a good thing. So I'm just
that's one of those factors, and we'll get into a little bit of those dynamics in the third part of our presentation this afternoon.
Well, and since we're only at the first of the third, we better get rolling.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, what did I do there? Okay, so social equity investment strategy. So as we talked a little bit about, in the comp plan, we were looking at the idea of housing opportunity and the infrastructure service gap, especially in East Portland, and that how one of the challenges is as you make investments in sidewalks and transit and parks, these neighborhoods become more attractive. And so and by attractive, you're gonna drive demand that could increase rents and home values, which is going to put pressure on involuntary displacement. So what we started to do and this is the diagram, if you will recall, from the comp plan, where we were looking at across the x-axis sort of areas of growth, and on the right-hand side, the areas and parts of town that we expected to grow faster. And then on the y-axis, what we termed back then was a need, which can be characterized as access to opportunity or infrastructure gaps. But on the top of the graph are the neighborhoods or the centers that have higher needs, lack access to opportunity, have more infrastructure needs in terms of transit and parks and streets and sidewalks. And so we had come up with this sort of quadrant approach to have these broad investment strategies to help drive our decision making about where to prioritize investment and how to do that. And after we've published and adopted the comp plan, we've had sort of ongoing discussions with the city of Seattle, who's had a similar. They sort of saw our diagram. We're having similar discussions in their city around their comp plan update, and so they took an approach where they actually looked more at sort of how you factor in the vulnerability and the vulnerable neighborhoods into that investment strategy. And again, this is the map that Nick showed earlier that shows the higher vulnerability levels in East Portland and Cully and North Portland, and that really how do we combine that vulnerability with this idea of access to opportunity, which is really about access to education, to jobs, to healthy food, to parks, to transit, to bikeways. This is the Healthy Connected City strategy in the Portland plan, and that was carried over into the complete neighborhoods concept in the comp plan. And this is our current map, and we're in the process of working with the Housing Bureau to think about how we go about this and update this map. But the darker purple areas have higher opportunity, and the housing policy is to encourage more housing, especially affordable housing, in these higher opportunity areas where people have it's easier to get to the services you need on a daily basis. And so what we've really looked at is how do we combine this notion of vulnerability with access to opportunity to help drive policy decisions and investments. And so what we come up with is this a slightly different quadrant approach, where we have vulnerability going up on the y-axis, so higher levels of vulnerability up on top, lower levels down on the bottom, and looking at, instead of growth, looking at access to opportunity. So on the right-hand side, you have higher opportunity areas, the Central City, inner north, northeast, inner Portland. And on the left-hand side, you have the lower opportunity areas of East Portland and Southwest Portland. And that when you begin to look at those areas and what those needs are, you begin to get some priorities in terms of wanting to prioritize affordable housing and even just housing in general, especially down in the lower right-hand corner, encouraging more housing in general, especially more affordable housing in those areas, whereas up in the upper left-hand corner where you have high vulnerability, low opportunity, that's where you want to focus, prioritize infrastructure investments, and as we're seeing in places like Cully, wanting to bring a suite of programs and opportunities that is not just all about hard infrastructure investment, but the affordable housing and the third piece of sort of the community capacity building. And then finally in the lower left-hand corner, where you have more affluent, lower vulnerability communities, you want to be strategic about your infrastructure investments, and that when you do that, you want to invest in affordable housing so that there are more lower income households that can take advantage of those investments. So that's an example of the Southwest Corridor. That's a regional decision-making process to make that very large investment in increasing transit service. And so at the same time, we want to go along with that in terms of a bigger picture investment, but at the same time, we want to make sure that affordable housing is integrated into that type of investment. So another way to look at how this plays out is, you know, where again we're using these bubbles as our centers, and where do they fall on this matrix in terms of their vulnerability or their access to opportunity. And you begin to again see the cluster of East Portland households now in the upper left, which is more vulnerable populations, lower opportunities, higher infrastructure needs, sort of driving investment to those areas in a more comprehensive and combined way. And what this means is, and another way to think about this is that if I'm going to make an investment in transit and I'm looking at two areas, I want to have a bias or a prioritization towards the areas in the upper left corner over, say, an area in the lower right that already enjoys a transit-rich environment, for example. Another way to look at this is, putting those centers on the map. What we have, again, are the orange centers, and these correspond to parts of East Portland, St. John's, North Portland, and this sort of next ring of sort of mid 82nd Avenue centers that need more opportunity, need more infrastructure investment, and have high vulnerable populations. So what we've annotated this map with the two circles here are the yellow circles are areas with higher shares of communities of color than the citywide average, so that fits into a racial equity investment strategy. And the purple rings are the areas where we're seeing rapidly increasing home prices. And Nick, do you remember what year is this? Is this 16 increasing rents, or has it been updated?
2008 to 2016 home values, and the rent data was from Metro using axiometrics, which is different than the slides that we saw in the gentrification typology.
Right. So even some of the areas of East Portland may have a purple ring around them now when you factor in the 17 data. Did you have something? What do I got? Well, let's go back to that map. So just as an example of how this might drive decision-making, especially infrastructure decision-making, PBOT, as part of their Build Portland Infrastructure Investment Plan, was using this as one of their factors. They were looking for a triple bottom line of projects that had a high degree of need, poor pavement condition, lack of below standards in terms of the build, on a high injury, high crash corridor, and in a sort of social equity investment area, which was driving them to invest a lot of that, or proposing to invest a lot of that in projects in East Portland, where they could get, as they called it, a triple win sort of thing.
There's one more sort of piece. We had a meeting earlier this week with the Citywide Bureau Equity Managers group, and one of the really sort of critical pieces that I took away from that group is thinking about the assets of social capital in some of these areas too, and how we can support the community organizations that are doing a lot of this anti-displacement work at the community level. And so while we're talking about infrastructure investment and planning projects specifically, I think it's also worth noting that the need to support the existing assets and the social capital that are in communities, and being able to support those community organizations as they do the work, and partner with them to help do this work as well. So we're talking about infrastructure, but I also want to note that there's a sort of community capacity, community capital piece that's also very important to this.
So are there questions about this approach?
Just to comment on that last point, during the CSO, the Big Pipe project, there was a lot of conversation about whether the Bureau of Environmental Services should hire consultants to come into the neighborhoods and provide their services, or would that money be better spent rather than hiring consultants, hiring the neighborhood and leaving behind social capital investment? So I think that's a really important objective.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we're hearing more and more, and that we're certainly in our projects trying to integrate more and more into our public outreach strategies, is those investments in those community organizations as opposed to relying on consultants for that sort of outreach.
Andreas, and then Andre.
Could you go back, I think, 2 slides to the matrix? That one, yeah. So looking at the top left, high vulnerability and low opportunity, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about prioritizing infrastructure, because obviously these are communities where there's an acute need, but also recognizing what you said of how even putting in sidewalks can create displacement. Like, what is the thought process the city's going through in recognizing that these neighborhoods and these communities really need investment, but also that investment might displace people?
I think that's really sort of the value added to sort of this type of matrix, and how we talk to the other bureaus about their projects in terms of where they're making investments and what those impacts might be. I think when we first started thinking about this in 2012, 2014 area, the Office of Equity was just getting up and running. Not many bureaus had equity planners or program managers, and now we have more of a network to really have that conversation with them. But this is just another way of telling PBOT, our parks, hey, you're not alone. Your mission is to provide a park within a half mile of everybody in the city, but that's going to have impacts, and we got to make sure that when you start the Park Lane master plan process, that we got to pull in the Housing Bureau to talk about what kind of stabilization or outreach programs we need around there, so the community is even aware that investment's coming, sort of thing. And I think it's a way of having the bureaus look, stick their head up and have a little bit of a broader view of what the combined package impact might be.
So is that something that's happening now, or that's something that will be happening moving forward?
I think it's something that's starting to happen now, and it's certainly our intent with this is to roll this out, and we see different pieces of it being picked up, and if you go back 2 more, keep going. So this process, for those that you were around for the 2012 study, we had a pretty simple 1 through 4 point scale, and you were either on or off. And PBOT, when they took our work, they went to a quintile system, so that, Teresa, you were talking about a little earlier, if, depending on how close to that line, in the old version, we were on or off, and now we get more shades of gray along that spectrum. And so that's an example of the bureaus sort of collaborating and learning from each other and bringing in different perspectives to try and improve at least these analytical tools and how we approach our conversations. But I think we still have a long way to go in terms of really learning how we roll this out.
Yep, we've been working very closely, specifically with the Bureau of Transportation, as they've been developing their equity map and their sort of decision-making criteria for transportation investments at PBOT. So we've been talking to Zan a lot, and specifically making sure that we're using the same information, that we're communicating it in ways that are very similar in terms of both the what and where of infrastructure as well as the how. So a lot of this is, where does it happen? What kind of project is it? But how do you also do that project, and how do you engage the community from the beginning through, hiring, through all of these other things that we need to talk about for the impacts and outcomes for a project as well.
I think Andre and then Mike.
Thanks. This is informative. looking forward to, and I don't know if this is the point where you talk about residential infill and
it's coming next.
Is it coming next? Okay, I'll hold off. I just will say one thing about housing prices and low-income people holding houses that's not been talked about, and it was an issue in North and Northeast Portland, was banking. The market and banking, there were clearly issues against the low-income African Americans that were there and other people, and I anecdotally hear there's banking issues against some of the other some people in East Portland, and so necessarily raising their house price may not give you the same advantage as someone that has higher value in terms of their income because of the banking issues that they would face. And so when you look at solutions around the country, you get kind of the New York solution that's and that's probably the furthest one that I've seen. But cities looking at how do you intervene in the banking, because an appreciated value property may actually hurt that individual versus because of they can't actualize the value.
Right. Until they sell and have to.
Until they sell, and then if you sell, you
right. And so one of the issues that's come up, just to peek ahead, is around residential infill, is similar to that is access to capital. That if you need $150,000 to build an ADU, where is that money coming from?
Exactly.
And is there, and so do we probably need a program, and Commissioner Udaley has talked about a program for next year that can help finance or underwrite or buy down the interest rate on these loans that can make it affordable and people can access, so that in many ways, the way we have first-time home buyer programs and education and access to lower interest loans, we probably need a similar suite for low-income homeowners to take advantage of the wealth building opportunity that residential infill could provide.
Mike, you were going to ask a question?
No, I just wanted to, I don't know whether this would be relevant or not, but, back in the 90s, the Coalition for a Livable Future created Equity Atlas, and there's been one since then, I think. I think PSU's in the process of producing an update now, and so I don't know if that information in that will be any value added or not. I don't know if you're aware of it or not.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll jump into the residential infill part since we've been talking about it a little bit on and off the whole time. I'll start in our this is going to be pretty high level and pretty sort of introductory into the residential infill project as that comes to you with the proposed draft in the next 6 weeks or 2 months or so, or whenever that's happening. But for the displacement risk analysis for the residential infill project, there was a lot of need for us to try to at least start to do something, because we have these new policies in the comp plan. This will be the first project that we're actually evaluating a post-comp plan implementation project under these policies. So there's really two big parts of it. One is how do we evaluate the risk? And there's been a lot of community impact or community conversations and a lot of comments that we've heard around that through the public comment period. The other is what do we do about it? And so as that project comes forward, we'll have more clarity on what that is in the proposed draft. So right now I'm going to focus on sort of how we got there, what that risk analysis was, and maybe some of the conversations that we've had with the community. So specifically, we're working off of the direction with the housing opportunity, of prioritizing housing in high opportunity areas as one of the criteria for, and this is a little bit of a combination of the displacement risk analysis that we looked at for the first time, the gentrification risk analysis, the social equity investment strategy, and how we would apply that to a planning process. So you look at housing opportunity. We use the vulnerable communities map as one of the criteria for looking at where folks would potentially be most at risk for displacement with the residential infill project, which is kind of a funky thing to get to Jeff's point of how do we actually evaluate what the potential risk of a zoning code project is that we don't have current allowances for in our zoning code and not able to look backwards and see how that's worked. So it's been an interesting exercise. But this is the map that we used. The sort of cross-hatching for higher shares of communities of color, we really wanted to prioritize in our conversations with community as well as with our advisory committee around leading with these conversations around racial equity. So we're evaluating the impact as a composite score of vulnerable communities, but we're really being strategic and having conversations about the impact to specific communities of color. Ultimately, that ended up with the discussion draft map. So we looked at the housing opportunity, the vulnerability analysis, the A overlay work that the residential infill project team had done, and then the district liaisons did a lot of work in trying to figure out where those lines should specifically be drawn given the differences in sort of conceptual boundaries, the political boundaries of census tracts that we were using for the vulnerability analysis. So the district liaisons worked on refining the sort of ins or outs. And so what you see here is the yellow is the A overlay from the discussion draft. The blue is the areas that were held out at that point in time as we had further conversations with specific communities. So this allowed us to kind of take a pause in our work and be intentional and strategic about engaging with both neighborhood associations and community organizations in the areas that were at risk for vulnerability in the blue areas. Not all blue areas that you see on the map were just vulnerable or pulled out of that for being vulnerable. There's some slope areas, high slope areas, or steep slope areas in the West Hills, as well as the Johnson Creek flood zone, floodplain over there, and the transfer of development rights with the planned district out there in the Johnson Creek watershed as well. So it's not all, most of the areas that you're looking at that were removed as part to have that discussion. For the discussion draft, we're in North Portland and St. John's, parts of Portsmouth, a segment of Cully that's east of Cully Boulevard, north of Prescott to about 72nd, 82nd or so out to 82nd there, and then parts of East Portland as well out around Rosewood and sort of mid-division, 122nd to 148th. So we've had a number of community conversations there. To get to this sort of wealth generation part, we've had a lot of comments around limiting the ability to generate wealth, and I think we want to be clear that the intention of this project is not a wealth generation tool. What we're trying to do with the residential infill project, the policy direction is first started off as compatibility of housing and first infill in single family neighborhoods, and secondly after the comp plan with the middle housing policies of accounting for different housing types within the single family zones in the city of Portland. So we don't have specific policy direction, and we're not trying to increase the equity or wealth generation opportunities for homeowners, although that's a lot of some of the comments that we've been getting about the perceived impact on that. But I do want to be clear that that's not part of our policy direction for the project as well. And so, broad overview, I think everybody's kind of up to speed on what's been going on with residential infill with the briefing a couple weeks ago. And so just open it up for questions if they come up.
I have a quick question on the statement you just made about wealth generation.
Sure.
Which I understand as not being a part of a policy, but if you're looking at an equity policy and you're offering up, if you're being inequitable about how you're offering up wealth generation, I mean, there's a nexus perhaps there or not. Can you kind of try to explain that?
There is a little bit. I think we'll get with the feasibility analysis work that we're doing with Johnson Economics, a phase 2 of the feasibility analysis. Once we get that sort of finalized out and part of the proposed draft in the package, when we come to you, we could probably have some discussion around what the impacts are in terms of feasibility. Really we're looking at increases in density and decreases in FAR utilization, so beyond what we're actually doing right now. So there's this interesting trade-off between shrinking the size of the box and allowing more units, and the perception of increasing density versus shrinking the total yield on square footage is having we're having all sorts of interesting conversations around the impacts of that to this project and the likelihood that we'll see middle housing units in certain parts of the city where that's going to happen, and ultimately our ability to try to incent affordable housing through some potential affordable housing bonus. So we're having all of these discussions around values and shrinking the size and increasing density that'll be part of, I think will be part of that broader residential infill discussion.
Joe?
And we're not getting into the specifics of the proposal today, but the interesting thing about the blue areas is it does overlap with what we were just looking at in terms of the different stages of gentrification risk in these neighborhoods. And I'm just mostly looking out east right now, but those are solid type 1 areas, mostly. And remember how we were just even in our discussion talking about social capital and community capacity, just to be able to respond to the level of infrastructure investment that we hope to be making out there. You know, the cautiousness about the blue is in the same spirit. Like, we don't 100% know how RIP will play out in terms of the market take up. And if there were mitigating sort of programs or assistance to make it a stay-in-place kind of wealth building impact more in these areas in blue, that we felt like we had the ability to do that, it would change maybe our thoughts about that. But it's related back to that, you know, sort of not the gentrification risk analysis.
And we've heard pretty clearly from some of our community organizations that as part of this, we need to be able to support community organizations to lead anti-displacement efforts at the community level, and that we should try to explore opportunities for how do we potentially support the sort of financing side or the funding side for low-income homeowners to take advantage of this. What's the relationship to low-income renters? Because really, in terms of displacement of this project, we're mostly concerned with low-income renters in single-family structures, which is a very small share of the overall residents in a lot of these areas. But those are we're mostly concerned in this project. We've been sort of thinking about it in terms of who's most vulnerable. And in the situation that you're most vulnerable, you're a low-income renter in a single-family structure. I think there's been some recent regulatory changes that City Council passed in the last couple of weeks that will impact that a little bit and provide more certainty and clarity to renters in single-family houses now. But in general, we've been mostly thinking about this around who's most vulnerable and how do we think about programs or opportunities to mitigate for that displacement for the most vulnerable.
So just, I see a whole bunch of people want to ask questions. Are you finished with your presentation and you're ready for
mostly
a barrage?
Just discussion. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure we got through everything you've got as I'm watching time.
Yeah.
So I think I saw Jeff trying to get my attention, Andreas trying to get my attention, then Andre, I'm seeing Eli, then Ben, and then Chris.
I'll try to be quick since I'm up first and there's a lot of people behind me. I'm unsure. So you're informing us about this new ability or this new attempt to try to anticipate displacement and what we can do to avoid sending communities of color and lower income people out of their neighborhoods. Okay. So we know right now with the residential infill, the current proposal is to not give East Portland, all your blue areas, the A overlay. And I've heard different rationales for why that is, and I'm still confused. But let me just focus on the one issue we're discussing today is displacement. Is the rationale for not putting the A overlay in East Portland fear of displacement, that somehow putting the A overlay there, even though we're going to put it on inner city or west of 82nd, but is the rationale that if we put the A overlay in these blue areas, we're going to accelerate displacement. I'll leave it there. Is that the rationale, that the A overlay in and of itself is going to be a major displacement factor, and therefore we don't want to put this displacement factor in East Portland? Is there a correlation between no A overlay and fear of displacement?
I wouldn't say that it's directly tied to the A overlay, that the A overlay is going to be causing a significant amount of displacement, and I think we'll probably have a lot of conversations and hear a lot of testimony about that and get a lot of comments about that. What we're really talking about is, again, in the context of these areas that we know are at risk of displacement, that we see on the map, that especially we hear about when we're out in the community in East Portland, how do we mitigate for that given new opportunities? How do we create opportunities for low-income folks? How do we create opportunities for renters? So it's more about for mitigating longer-term impacts and how do we support that? And is this, as a planning project, an opportunity for us to look at programming and look for opportunities to do that? So a little bit, yes, there's some risk, and these are the areas that we're more concerned about because there's more vulnerable communities and we have a higher share of low-income renters. What can we do to support those communities that are vulnerable to displacement?
So another way to think about this is with that proposed map, we strictly looked at what are the tools that we have direct control over. And that is, do you apply the zoning, the A overlay, the additional units, or not? And in the blue areas, there's reasons why, either for steep slopes or for displacement risk, why you might not want to apply that to those areas. The reply has been, no, we want you to apply it. We want more housing opportunity. We want the wealth building opportunity in there. But when you apply it, we need these programs, the technical assistance, the access to capital, the education, the community building, to support applying it in those areas. Well, we can have a laundry list of programs that will come into the future, but we don't have any budget behind it. We don't have the funding guaranteed that those programs will be there. And so that is now that's the challenge, or the decision point for you all is, do you apply the map and say, yes, City Council, we need the programs, you need to fund these programs, and then you hope that City Council funds those programs? Or how do you frame that recommendation to Council that balances housing opportunity and wealth building opportunity with the need to provide the community tools and investment so that those communities can take advantage of that?
Just to briefly respond, I'll pass the mic on to the next person, but I think that's the premise of your saying we've got to recommend all these programs is that putting the A overlay will have such a negative impact on displacement that we should not do it unless we have all these support programs, financial access to capital. And I'm not sure that's consistent with what you're telling us. You're not saying the A overlay will cause significant enough displacement that we need the programs. What I'm hearing is the A overlay may have some impact on displacement, but conversely, it may have the beneficial impact of wealth creation. So I don't accept that for us to decide which way we go on A overlay in East Portland should be tied to, we only should go there if there's a package of supporting policies and funding. I think that's a leap that the evidence, the data doesn't show us. There's nothing persuasive to me yet that says A overlay will have a significant negative displacement, and we should not put it on there unless we can counterbalance that. I think that's a false assumption. I think the answer to me, what I'm seeing is no one can really say what the impact of the A overlay by itself will be on displacement. It may have some, it may have
I think
none, but it also, by the same token, it may have some or none wealth creation impact. So
I think it's gray.
I think you're imbuing the A overlay with far more tangible results than the evidence suggests we can predict at this point.
And I think that's what Tyler was getting at in terms of looking at the financial feasibility analysis, and that where the values match up, where someone might actually take advantage of that, especially in looking at sort of going from a single family home to a duplex, or going to 2 ADUs where you can put one in the basement and one in the backyard. And that sort of tamps down, this is not going to happen everywhere right away because of those values. I also think that what you're describing is a situation that is gray, and you're being asked to make a black and white decision.
That's often what we have.
Yes.
That makes sense to me. I think that, to muse a little bit on that, it seems like I'd expect to see both wealth creation and displacement. I think that some people will see an increase in wealth and some people will be displaced. I think that first I wanted to say for the blue areas, I don't know if anyone's going to disagree with removing areas for steep slope, so I anticipate most of our conversation will be about an increased displacement risk. And for that, I had a thought, and I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on it, which is that displacement risk isn't necessarily geographic. It has a lot more to do with populations, and it makes sense the way I think you've mapped it out, where there are higher concentrations of certain populations in different areas, and so it makes sense to focus on the areas with a higher concentration of vulnerable populations and a higher displacement risk accordingly. But I guess the concern I have with focusing entirely on geography is the recognition that, like was mentioned before, all these neighborhoods and tracts are on a spectrum, and so there is populations vulnerable to displacement throughout the city, not just in the areas that have been included in the blue zone. And so using the removal of those areas as a primary tool to mitigate the displacement risk addresses, or at least provides a solution for those areas, but not for areas that aren't in the blue zones. And so that's just an early thing I want to flag. And I appreciate the conversation around programs and the willingness to start thinking about what else could accompany this to prevent displacement and support community organizations. But I do have a concern about timing and the timing of introducing a zoning change and then saying we will follow up with programs sometime in the future if we have council support, if other bureaus develop programs, if we get funding. I'd be curious if there would be a way to having an unlock fee or something in this program, since this is the program we're discussing now, to generate funding that could be attributed to programs moving forward. I think if there's any connection, that would seem to make sense to me, but I will keep my specific comments until later.
As I think about this problem, is risk. The gray is risk, and if you look at the risk, and I was here during Interstate and the building of Interstate, the risk was you don't have enough money to do both, and the political will was probably not there to do both, to kind of do a minor interstate and do a little bit of social equity. So it was build, and then we will come back and we'll get there to save the community. Didn't happen. And so the risk today that I think we're going to be faced with, and we are faced with, is there's things out of our control. There's funding, there's banking. Is this the tool that drives people out of the neighborhood? I don't know, but it certainly appears that it's a significant contributor to displacement and gentrification. Is it the final straw? I mean, I don't know. But the risk is if we do this and we don't do anything else, and we lose significant populations, are we, doing what people tell you not to do? Continue to do the same thing and expect different outcomes. We don't control banking, we don't control that, but what we're talking about is timing, funding, and political will to mitigate our risk. And from that standpoint, I think we need to think about it in terms of what we can do today and what we should put in place in the future to do more, because making opportunities available for people of low income that can't take advantage of an opportunity is not an opportunity. It really is not an opportunity. So when we look at this, this is our opportunity to look through that equity lens and say, is it a real opportunity for all populations that we're creating, or is it an opportunity just for some? And if we're going to create those opportunities, do we create the opportunities for the ones that can take advantage of that opportunity the fastest first and look at creating tools that allow other populations that may be, and not saying that they're going to take advantage of appreciation or going to take advantage of building units or selling, but doing that, because the experience in Northeast is if you can't take advantage of it, you sell your property and you lost your advantage at that point and you've lost a population. So I think community groups need to be involved in this, and we need a broader conversation. I think this is really good work, but I think it's a broader conversation about holistically how do we address populations that are vulnerable. This is one tool. And because of how we're approaching it, it's the only tool we have in front of us today. And so, but we need a more holistic approach, I think, as we think about just the residential infill and affordable housing, because it is a more complex issue than giving more capacity and on your lot.
So I'm going to do a quick time check. I think everybody just about has their hands up and wants to say something. We've got 5 minutes. We can either extend the meeting slightly, or we can try to maybe pose questions and ask for kind of it to be addressed later. So I guess maybe hand up for those who want to stay a little bit later, or can stay a little bit later. I won't say want. How about that? I've got... Okay, seem to have a majority that can stay later. So we'll shoot for 3:45 at this point, a little bit later. And again, I guess if we could kind of try to be respectful, since everybody pretty much has something they would like to add to the conversation, that'd be great. I can't remember where I left off in the order. Hopefully you guys can remember where you're at. No? Yeah? Because I know who came after Andre. That's what I thought. We went this way.
I just want to pick up from Jeff. I understand the methodology about the blue areas and the steep slopes, and there might be some David Douglas capacity district involved there, but there's something slightly counterintuitive about leaving that portion of East Portland out. Although I understand the methodology and how this comes into place, I would offer up a slightly different point of view, or at least a consideration, that the housing types that we're talking about are kind of on the lower end of the spectrum, and inherently I think they have a lot of sweat equity opportunity, which I think, considering the area, might actually end up being a great opportunity for not only wealth creation but intergenerational living, etc. Basically given the ability for people to do to build at their own pace, with their own time, perhaps with less conventional funding mechanisms, coupling together families and however. So it seems like the net effect might actually be to take out an opportunity in an area of town where there actually might be even more of a need for that. Just a different perspective.
Eli?
Thanks. I too am sort of jumping on Commissioner Bacharach's comments. I think that this map is getting more power than maybe it deserves in the discussion. I think that some of the reasons for the residential infill project, to my understanding, were to address changing household size, less affordable housing options anywhere in the city. Less expensive housing options, climate impacts, things like that. And we just had a whole briefing on how there's this other additional goal of equity and displacement issues. And this happens to be the zoning code process that's going through the station right now, but that doesn't mean that the zoning code process can address that issue. And whether you're on, it's partly whether you're on which side of the yellow or blue on this map, but also whether you're white or yellow on this map. White is a part of this map where, I would like to see more of a connect the dots, which I think was what Jeff was describing, whether you can build one ADU or two, whether you can do a mid-block duplex or a single-family home within the same FAR limits. Does that pivot things to address the displacement issue, or maybe it doesn't? I can totally see a situation where a large investment in a transit line would have a very predictable effect on displacement, and we should make plans around it to try and avoid the externalities and people's lives being ruined or shaken up. I think it's less hard for me to connect the dots between which side of one of these lines you are with those code things on, which aren't that different, frankly. It's the same size bloody structure, and based on housing demographic changes, it may not be that many different people in the houses as there were. Does that really tilt the scale towards an area of the city that is more prone to displacement or less prone to displacement? If it doesn't, we shouldn't try and use this tool. It's an important tool we have for many other public policy objectives, be used to try and deal with something that it might not deal with very well. So I guess I'd like to see the dots connected there in a way that I'm sure we can connect the dots on other major public investments that Portland has wrestled with in the past. Thanks.
Michelle, did you have questions?
Sure. So I guess part of my concern is, one, I don't want to approve something that's going to cause widespread chaos. At the same time, I worry about sending something to council saying, and we think you should have these 5 financial programs with it, without having the comprehensive look in the strategy citywide as to what the best bang for your buck housing investments are. So I guess my question is, where are we in terms of that comprehensive working with the Housing Bureau to figure out this is the array of things, and where is it appropriate to link zoning with programs, and where is there some other, like building community land trust opportunities, things like that, to try and deal with the challenges?
Yeah, I'm on Google Maps right here with the satellite view, and I want to get clarity on the blue. You reference floodplains and you reference steep slopes, and I'm looking at the landscape out there, and from what I'm seeing, the blue pretty much coincides with those steep slopes and Johnson Creek floodplain. And in fact, the city of Portland right now, over the last 10 years, has actually been using FEMA money to buy people out, to get them out of that floodplain. And when we think about climate change, the floodplains are likely to expand dramatically, and there's actually some legal issues still hanging out the city's going to need to deal with. So I see the blue as simply being a proactive look at, especially under the specter of climate change, saying we do not want to increase density in those vulnerable lands.
Can I add something on that?
Yeah.
Just in terms of links in the floodplain, the city is making a lot of investments out there in terms of getting the mapping correct.
Right.
Because a lot of it actually doesn't flood, and people are paying exorbitant flood insurance rates. So in terms of other strategies the city's doing, they're helping people get elevation certificates and get their actual insurance payment more in line with the actual risk. But there's another strategy going on in terms of how do you use that area to create jobs, to preserve affordable housing, and get the ecological lift.
Yeah, and there's been reduced flooding out there because of those getting homes out and reconnecting the floodplain.
It's just, it's a
So-
complicated area.
So this edge of the blue area corresponds to the Johnson Creek Plan District, which is broader than the floodplain because we have a transferable development right that's within the floodplain and trying to allow you to transfer those units outside that but within the plan district. And so the reason there are other opportunities as single family zoning where you could have blue areas here. We did not want to undermine that current setup within that Johnson Creek Plan District that is both the floodplain plus a little buffer area. The blue areas do not include that area. So those are areas that are sort of outside the floodplain, outside the Plan District, away from those resources in that program.
But also, there's steep
Mike.
slopes that are included, right?
No,
Well, on the west, in the West Hills, some of it is steep slopes in the West Hills. Some of the blue. I think what we'll do when we come back with this for the work session and the testimony is to come back with a map that better shows why they're excluded instead of all just being blue. What's the displacement risk? What's the Johnson Creek Plan District? What's the steep slopes? So we can better communicate what's happening.
Yeah, I had on my list, you need two maps. One's environmental conditions.
Yep.
The other is your economic, perhaps, conditions or how your displacement risk. Chris, I believe you had questions, and then Teresa, you okay? Okay.
Yes. So I took the opportunity in preparation for this meeting to reread a piece of testimony that the Anti-Displacement Coalition submitted for the discussion draft. And they're quite clear they don't think this is a spatial problem. Right? They encourage the opportunity to be applied citywide, and they're more interested in value capture, as Andres mentioned, and building in opportunities for affordability. So I just want to throw that into the mix.
So quick. Did I miss anybody that wanted to speak up? Okay, I'll try to make this quick. We covered one of them. When you guys come back, I would love to see just where you're at with just, if nothing else, the list of the community programs, kind of piggyback, what Michelle was talking about, and just kind of getting my head around that. And then just kind of maybe a final comment and echoing, I think, the debate that's happening here. I'm, and somewhat to the risk portion that you were bringing up, Andre, is I guess I'm struggling a little bit with what is the risk of actually adding an ADU to displacement. And it seems to me, I'm almost seeing it almost differently, that in my mind, it seems like it offers you the potential to offer yet a more affordable unit in an area. Same thing with the duplex, as you've commented. So I'm struggling with understanding how the risk of how that's tied to risk of displacement, if there is any evidence of that. And then, of course, I think I grasp the concept of wealth creation and equity. So I'm more struggling a little bit more on that side of it. So if we could kind of find more information to have that conversation, would be certainly helpful for me. Sure.
Are we, this displacement risk analysis work you're doing, we have residential infill project, and so we've talked a little bit today about the connection between the two, but is it also a larger policy analysis that we're working on separate from residential infill, or are we only doing it in the context of residential infill?
I think it's both. So the social equity investment strategy is sort of like the broader policy effort and how we coordinate and work with other bureaus and how we use the displacement risk analysis to drive those decisions. And then when you actually have, whether it's residential infill or better housing by design in the multifamily code, in the context of that specific policy decision in front of you, this is one more piece of information about who benefits and who's burdened by these policy changes or these code changes or map changes. And that's what we've said in the comp plan is that has to be a specific factor in your decision making, and we need to wrestle with this: who benefits, who's burdened, how are we going to mitigate that burden as part of your decision making. Doesn't mean you can't not make a decision, but it has to be part of the conversation and discussion.
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, it's a really good question, and this is a great discussion. We need to figure out how to operationalize this kind of analysis and consideration. So that's what this discussion's about, and what we were hoping from we started to get today. So thank you.
Go ahead, Eli.
Just a suggestion that we might want to enlist advice from Dr. Bates on this, and she studied a lot and probably has opinions not just on the data side of it, but on the implications for action through zoning reform.
Can I just make one comment?
Sure.
When I talk about risk, the issue for me is not whether you put 1, 2, or 3 ADUs or 4plexes or whatever. It's the question of, and it's back to the comp plan, who gets the benefit? Who will get the benefit of that, of what we do? Not, if we want to put everybody in the game, so be it. But who will get the benefit of that, of what our actions are? And that's part of this issue of the analysis, is not whether or not the blue's in or out, but who is going to get the benefit of what we do, of appreciation, who's going to get the benefit of whether or not you can talk about sweat equity, you can talk about all these things, but if you can't actualize that benefit, that 1, 2, 3, or that code change, it doesn't make any difference. If you can't get banking, if you can't go out and you don't have reserves to go out and build it yourself, those are things of benefit, not whether or not we have 10 units on a piece of property. And so the risk is looking at who we put in the box for benefits.
Any other concluding remarks in the last few minutes? Looks like we do not have any. Thank you guys for staying the few extra minutes. We appreciate the presentation today. Very thought-provoking, as it always is. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.